Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, February 1st, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Maurice Chammah, staff writer at the Marshall Project and author of Let the Lord Sort Them Out, the rise and fall of the death penalty. Meanwhile, Joe Biden to meet with 10 Republican senators offering a woefully insufficient COVID relief package. And Donald Trump's legal team quits over the weekend ahead of his upcoming impeachment trial. And as Joe Biden ramps up vaccinations, a new report that the Trump administration actively lobbied lawmakers to deny states vaccine money. 9 of New York State's top health officials have quit over Andrew Cuomo's massive coronavirus failures. Meanwhile, anti-vaxxers shut down one of the country's largest vaccine sites in the country in California. And as the Republicans solidifies its support of Trump and QAnon followers, they look to purge impeachment supporters. Except, of course, Mitch McConnell, who only supported it privately. Republicans respond to record voter turnout by redoubling their efforts to suppress votes across the country. In Myanmar, military stages a coup, claimed to control the country for 1 year as they detain its leader. Popularly elected leader, I should say. Joe Biden reverses the last-minute Donald Trump plan to freeze $27 billion worth of domestic programs. And lastly, Oregon decriminalizes all drugs as of today. Addicts to be offered treatment as opposed to prison. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is, thanks for joining us at the beginning of the week. And of course, having trudged through the snow, Emma Vigeland is with us. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam. The snow and wind. You left that part out. The whipping winds is what gets me. I love the snow, but when I can't feel my face because of the wind, that's the tough part. Yeah.
The snow and the wind. Yes. Well, yes. Apologies. We're getting hit pretty hard with a snowstorm. Well, the entire East Coast, I think, is so, or at least the Northeast Coast. Expecting, I don't know, maybe a foot at the end of all of this, but kids aren't as excited as they usually are because there's no real snow days, are sort of not as exciting when you're.
Yeah, they're home all the time now. Yeah,
exactly.
They wish they had a snow day where they could go in, be away from dad for a second. Yeah.
Yes. Well, they're away from dad, but all that said, thanks for joining us, folks. Obviously a busy week. We've got, we have the Republicans. I think and for the life of me now, I think it was last Thursday, we were talking about the COVID relief bill. And one of the dynamics that was coming out was this gang of 16 that so-called moderate Republicans and conservative Democrats had convened as a way of essentially undercutting the $1.9 trillion package that Joe Biden had proposed for COVID relief. And one of the problems with that is that Gang of 16, 8 Democrats, 8 Republicans, 8 Republicans doesn't get you anything, because 8 Republicans is the same as no Republicans on a bill, because if you don't hit at least 10 Republicans, then you cannot defeat their filibuster. And because you need at least 60 votes in the Senate to overcome a filibuster. Well, somebody on the Republican side figured that out, and they said, we've got to even appear like we're doing anything real, we've got to present 10 Republicans who can sign on to a bill. The problem is the Republican Party has moved so far to the right and has so little interest in helping Americans recover from COVID, the economic effects, and frankly, I mean, this new report out about Donald Trump's administration lobbying quite successfully, it appears, Republican lawmakers to deny states funding for vaccinations, that Republicans had no interest in helping Americans recover from the economic impact of the COVID pandemic, nor apparently the actual pandemic itself. And so they've presented a $600 billion bill, which is not even remotely close to the task. And so Democrats are faced with two questions here, or two options. One is to stop trying to pursue a deal with Republicans for the sake of pursuing a deal with Republicans, and simply take all of this and just do it through reconciliation, or to maybe strike a deal for $600 billion with Republicans there and then hope that you can go into reconciliation and make up the rest. However, we know there are shaky Democrats here. We'll talk more about that later in the program. We're talking about like folks like Kristen Sinema. We're talking about folks like Joe Manchin. John Tester, Emma, you said you saw it came out in support of saying that $1.9 billion was not too much money.
Trillion. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. And so that's, to me, that's a good indicator that Schumer will be able to keep his caucus together eventually. But I think the problem here is that they are wasting way too much time, Biden and co., in order to give the appearance of bipartisanship, as if the American public cares whether their stimulus checks are passed through reconciliation or over a filibuster. I mean, it just seems like very odd doing this bizarre dance that's entirely unnecessary.
Right. And is it really bipartisanship anyways? Like, what does that really mean in this instance? That you get 10, a quarter of the Republican caucus? No, excuse me, less than a quarter, 20% of the Republican caucus to sign on 1/3 of what is actually needed for the American public. Here is Bernie Sanders responding to Martha Raddatz on ABC This Week from this weekend about the idea of passing through reconciliation. And understand, reconciliation simply means that you need a majority vote, period. It's not that radical of a concept in what is supposedly a democracy. Here's number one.
Good morning, Senator. The Democrats seem prepared to pass Biden's COVID relief package with or without Republican support, which has been shrinking in recent days. Did the president overestimate the appetite for bipartisanship?
Look, Martha, we all want bipartisanship, and I think you're going to see more of it as we move down the pike. You're going to see bipartisanship on infrastructure. There are a lot of Republicans who are outraged by the high cost of prescription drugs in this country. We pay 10 times more than other countries do for certain drugs. We are going to look forward to working with Republicans. But right now, this country faces an unprecedented set of crises. We have families who are watching this program right now who cannot feed their kids. We have millions of people who face eviction. We are in the midst of the worst pandemic in 100 years. We have got to act, and we have got to act now. And we just don't have.
Senator, you've said you can't reach out to Republicans indefinitely, and Democrats should use the majority. But this morning, we're hearing 10 GOP senators have a new plan. So is it a mistake for Democrats to consider abandoning bipartisanship negotiations so soon?
Martha, the issue is not, bipartisanship. We're not. The issue is, are we going to address the incredible set of crises and the pain and the anxiety which is in this country? You know what? I don't care what anybody says. We have got to deal with this pandemic. We have got to make sure that we are producing the vaccines that we need and get those vaccines into the arms of people. We cannot have children in America going hungry, people being evicted, schools not open. We need to open our schools in a safe way. That's what we have to do. So the question is not bipartisanship. The question is addressing the unprecedented crises that we face right now. If Republicans want to work with us, they have better ideas on how to address those crises. That's great. But to be honest with you, I have not yet heard that.
Does your party have the votes to pass the relief package through the reconciliation process if you decide to go that route?
Yeah, I believe that we do, because it's hard for me to imagine any Democrat, no matter what state he or she may come from, who doesn't understand the need to go forward right now in an aggressive way to protect the working families of this country. Look, all of us will have differences of opinion. This is a $1.9 trillion bill. I have differences and concerns about this bill, but at the end of the day, we're going to support the President of the United States, and we're going to come forward, and we're going to do what the American people overwhelmingly want us to do.
Well, I just love how he frames that. I mean, the issue with all of this is that Joe Biden has framed this bipartisanship being necessary as a precursor to passing this bill. Now, he's backed off of it a little, but this was what he ran on. Bernie's framing is exactly correct. I mean, the media likes bipartisanship for bipartisanship's sake, and that's one of my frustrations with it. That's where the framing of those questions comes in, where it's just about, can you come to a compromise? Well, what does that compromise entail? And I love how Sanders is able to reframe it from, no, let's talk about the substance of the relief, as opposed to the salsa dance or the tango of bipartisanship. That's the better analogy than the salsa.
I have to say that when I was watching that clip, the idea of having Bernie Sanders as the chairman of the budget committee really does make this this pivot much easier to make, when there was a certain inevitability. And look, Joe Biden ran on unity, and I think we will see, hopefully, knock on wood, that he is going to define unity as something other than having to compromise I think, obviously Sanders says that I think he was implying he would like a bigger bill, frankly. And I think there are others who would. Certainly I would be one of those. But at the very least, we're not seeing Joe Biden do what the Obama administration did, which is come out, compromise with themselves as a way of enticing Republicans, spend a lot of time with Republicans basically taking a step back from meeting in the middle, then taking a step forward to meet Republicans in the new middle, and have that dance go on for a year and a half. Instead, what we're seeing is the Biden administration not only holding fast, they're inviting the Republicans to the White House, and we will see what comes out of this. But if it's just like, hey, I invited them, we talked, we couldn't come to an agreement, we're just going to pass this because we have the majority, that is a great way to define unity. Unity meaning, well, I'm willing to meet with them, have lunch, and if we can't come to an agreement, we're going to go forward with this. But one of the things, and we'll expand on this later in the program, they sent Kamala Harris out to do interviews in Arizona and West Virginia. It ruffled Joe Manchin's feathers a little bit, basically reiterating the point, we need this bill. And so if there was any shakiness that Joe Manchin was feeling, or Kristen Sinema, this was a way to put pressure on them. And Joe Manchin bucked a little bit. But we then had the governor, Republican governor of West Virginia, come out and say, we need this. And so this is so far, would like to see a bigger number, but so far, at least with the number that the Biden administration, and I think one that, look, Joe Biden won the primary, won the presidency. They're at least holding to what they said that they would do. Although I think, there's a very good argument that if you're going into reconciliation, you might as well make those checks $2,000 just for the, A, we know the benefit that it provides people. B, we also know the politics of this. But we should take a break now. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Maurice Chammah, staff writer at the Marshall Project and author of Let the Lord Sort Them Out, The Rise and Fall of the Death Penalty. In the meantime, couple of sponsors of today's program. A reminder, your support makes this show possible. If you become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com, you get the free half of the show, free of commercials as well. It's another little bonus. With that said, I know folks are busy. Everybody wants to get a little smarter and a little bit better read. Am I right, Emma?
Yeah, sorry, I had accidentally muted myself. Yes, I do.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
Well,
Emma,
I mean, my brain clearly needs to be sharpened because I forgot I was on mute.
Now, do you want to sit through an entire book that's going to tell you like 10 lessons on how to sharpen your brain? No, you don't need all the prose there and the poetry and no, you want to get what they call the key takeaways. Well, the way you do that by using an app called Blinkist. Blinkist takes the key ideas and insights from over 4,000 nonfiction bestsellers in 27 different categories, gathers them together in 15-minute text or audio explainers, basically like Cliff Notes, but they call them blinks. Does anybody remember Cliff Notes, or is that just me? Monarch?
No, I do. I remember it being very taboo, like, it's right.
Well,
but,
if you've got a nice piece of literature, you want to read the literature because it's good.
Well, I was thinking of it in the context of like homework. It was very taboo to use Cliff Notes, but Blinks, now that you're an adult, you get to use Cliff Notes, except it's Blinks.
And so Blinks let you get to a topic quickly, finds new topics that you want to grow from or figure out which books you want to spend time reading or listening to more deeply. Blinkist has even teamed up with popular podcast creators to create Blinks for those too, so you can get to the heart of a podcast episode fast. Apparently 15 million people already use Blinkist. And for me, like I say, I've mentioned this in the past, people say I've got a little personality issues or I'm not that friendly. And I like to, we'll dig into some of these, like how to, how to make friends or how to, be appropriate or, be sincere or stuff like that. But I'm not going to read the whole book. So I do it quickly. And then the other thing I do for Blinkist is books that I feel like I should know about and should read, but I don't really want to, but I can pretend like I did, in like, I guess we don't have many cocktail parties anymore and I don't really get invited to them, but in the event that maybe I bump into somebody. But that is...
Put it on your dating profile app,
exactly,
right? Like how well read you are. You've read all these books.
Definitely. On the dating profile, you definitely want to be able to say that you read Blowout by Rachel Maddow. And I did the Blink. That's and then of course there's also stuff like the investing stuff. I feel like I should know about it, but I'm not very good at that. So Barefoot Investor by Scott Pape. You blink that. Right now, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/Majority Report. Start your free 7-day trial. Get 25% off a Blinkist premium membership. That's Blinkist, spelled BLINKIST. Blinkist.com/Majority Report. You get 25% off and a 7-day free trial. Blinkist.com/Majority Report. Also, folks, nobody wants to leave their house to go shopping these days. I am not a particular good dresser or chooser of clothes. And I have one solution that deals with both those problems. Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix offers clothing that is hand-selected by expert stylists for your unique size, your style, your budget, whatever it is. It's the super easy solution to finding what makes you look and feel your best. This is what happens. They suggest 4 or 5 pieces of clothing to you. You try the pieces on home before you buy. You keep your favorites. If you don't like any of them, you send them back. You pay $20 styling fee for each box, which of course you can edit before they send it to you. And then it gets credited towards any piece that you keep. There's no subscription required. You can try Stitch Fix once, or you can set up automatic deliveries. Shipping, returns, exchanges, they're easy, super free, or I should say free and super easy. And they give you a prepaid envelope in each box, so it makes it super easy. And they have styles for women. They have styles for men. They have styles for kids. They ship all over the U.S. and in the U.K. For me, I've talked about the straight pocket, 5-pocket. This is a huge revelation for me, because for a long time I was just wearing Carhartts with like 8 pockets. And
so you simplified the pocket experience?
I just returned to sort of like the jean style, which I hadn't worn in years. And I got this great pair of pants, sort of like, I only have like a 3-color palette that I use for anything. Right. I think people can know that, but sort of like a dark green Nashville 5-pocket thing. And then I got a flannel shirt, which Mila took care of. She, of course, absconded with that immediately. And I got a thermal shirt that I wasn't sure about, but now, one of those waffle ones that I used to wear back in my slacker days.
Oh, those are just the most comfortable things in the world. Anything waffle, I'm down to purchase.
I got to say,
food and clothing.
I now just wear one shirt over the weekend. That's usually it, which I should probably do something about that. But right now you can get started today at stitchfix.com/majority. You get 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. That's everything in your box. It's stitchfix.com/majority for 25% off when you keep everything in your fix. Stitchfix.com/majority. And lastly, we're also sponsored today by Third Love. Third Love uses the measurements of millions of women to design bras with all-day comfort and support. Every Third Love bra is made with signature memory foam cups, no slip straps, scratch-free band in a variety of sizes. They have this online fit finder quiz, which based upon our 2 Third Love official testers, I am not one of them.
I am one. I have multiple Third Love bras, and I do multiple. Even before I started working here, and I think they are just like the best. I
wouldn't force you to wear them. Well, my understanding, the big deal that people tell me is that they fit, which is apparently very, very difficult to find online. And they have a Third Love Perfect Promise fit or Fit Promise, where if you don't love it, you can exchange it. Returns are super easy. They're free for 60 days. 2021 is your time to shine, folks. Focus on what makes you happy, starting with better bras and better underwear. You can check out all the exclusive styles at thirdlove.com, from modern stripes to lace that actually feels soft to their #1 rated 24/7 classic t-shirt bra. Here is one of our testimonials from one of our 2 Third Love trier-outers. The idea that I had 60 days to try out the bras drew me in, but in the end, I don't think I've ever had a better experience buying clothing online. Certainly not when it comes to bras. The Fit Finder worked like a charm. The choice of style is amazing. Both the bras I ordered were a perfect fit. They are incredibly comfortable and cute and subtle. Third Love knows there's a perfect bra for everyone. So right now they're offering my listeners 20% off your first order. Go to thirdlove.com/majority right now to find your perfect fitting bra. Get 20% off your first purchase. That's thirdlove.com/majority for 20% off today. Check it out, folks. We will put all the links into the podcast description and at majority.fm and on our YouTube page and in the podcast description. Okay. I want to welcome to the program Maurice Chammah. He is a staff writer at the Marshall Project and author of Let the Lord Sort Them Out, The Rise and Fall of the Death Penalty. or I should say, let the Lord sort them. Maurice, welcome to the program. Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh,
there you go. Now we can.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Great.
Maurice, welcome to the program. Congratulations on your book. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Sorry for the technical chaos.
That is the era we are living in. So, all right, Maurice, let's start with this. I did not know this. I mean, I've been, I guess I should say I am an opponent of the death penalty and have been for, I think, most of my adult life. I was not aware of how close we were to ending the death penalty in 1972. Will you tell us about that?
Sure. This shocked me too when I got into the research. I mean, in the 1960s, the death penalty virtually disappeared in the United States. This was back when Europe was abandoning it, Canada abolished it, and it seemed like we were going to do it too. There were just like no executions year by year, and that was largely because a group of civil rights lawyers had managed to convince the courts to stop executions and sort of slow them down by just filing every motion they could think of. In 1972, the Supreme Court then took on a case that these civil rights lawyers brought to them that was about whether the death penalty violates the Constitution. And the Supreme Court said it does violate the Constitution, but just the laws that we have, not the death penalty itself. The death penalty is fine in and of itself, but the laws that different states have on the books for how it gets doled out are problematic, right? And so what this ends up doing is inviting the states, largely southern states, largely states that where sort of states' rights are a big part of the picture, and there's a general sort of consensus against Washington and federal edicts. These states write new death penalty laws, and we see the sort of backlash play out in those laws, and then executions start to come back in the 1980s and 90s.
All right, so I mean, let's be explicit. I want to be a little more explicit about that 1972 Furman versus Georgia case, because when it said the death penalty, they didn't decide that the death penalty was unconstitutional. What they said was that the specifics in the way that it was being doled out was unconstitutional.
That's right.
So it's more like it's not so much that the death penalty is bad, just to simplify, but rather the way that you're going about it is bad.
That's right. And that these civil rights lawyers had argued to the court that it's racially biased, right? That whether you get the death penalty has much more to do with your race than it does with the particular crime that you committed. The justices aren't willing to go that far. They're very sort of uncomfortable talking about race. So they focus mainly on it being arbitrary, right? That two different people can commit the same crime, and whether it's race or some other set of factors, there's sort of a totally random outcome on which one of those two people actually gets the death penalty and gets executed. One judge, justice on the Supreme Court, compared it to being struck by lightning, right? And so when the states go back and try to write these new laws, they're mainly trying to solve that problem, to try to create some, meaningful distinction between who gets the death penalty and who doesn't.
All right, let's take I want to just take a slight detour before we go back on how this was addressed and talk a little bit about Texas, because in many respects, the story of the death penalty is a story of Texas in many respects. And we should just say, in terms of those statistics about who gets the death penalty, I think at this point, you've shown that, or at least you cite a study that showed it is the race of the person who is killed, which often determines the probability you will get the death penalty. Not so much the race of the person who commits the murder, but the race of the person who is killed. Well, let's talk about about Texas and this concept of. I mean, I think certainly, I don't know if I've ever really thought about it that strongly, but I think I would have perceived that the idea of Texas being sort of the number one place for the death penalty in this country, certainly as of late, was a function of the number one in terms of biggest percentage of any one state, I should say. 1/3 of our death penalties, right? Our executions have taken place there. Out of 1,500, I think it's about 500, more or less. That it would have been like, this is all about frontier justice. But you tell this, well, you tell it a couple of different ways through Craig Washington, who is a lawmaker, and Damelin Racer. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name.
Danelin Reeser, sure.
Danelin Reeser. Yeah, tell us about those two and about what the story they tell about the death penalty.
Right. So in the 1970s, Texas legislators were debating sort of whether to bring the death penalty back and how to bring it back. And most of the legislators, sort of in these old recordings I found, talked about Texas's, long history of frontier justice. This idea that if the state doesn't execute people, groups of vigilantes are just going to go string people up. And there's a lot of references to, barroom fights and the just sort of predilection for violence among Texans. Not a lot of data to back that up. Violent crime was not higher here than it was anywhere else. But there was a sort of image of like John Wayne movies that you would see in the political conversation back then, and you still see it today in certain instances. I certainly heard it when I was researching for the book. But there's sort of another narrative out there, and this is the narrative of lynchings, right? Texas, like many other southern states, had hundreds and hundreds of illegal mob killings, essentially, of primarily Black men in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And there's a handful of lawyers in Texas who have really done a lot of the work to try to raise that story up and connect the dots between those illegal lynchings and the sort of legal executions that followed. Many listeners might be familiar with Brian Stevenson in Alabama, who's a sort of famous figure in terms of making this argument. But in Texas, Craig Washington, who was a member of the legislature in the 70s, and then Danelin Reeser, who's a defense lawyer who is still active and working, were both sort of very leading figures in trying to, from a scholarly perspective and then from a kind of political perspective, connect the dots and explain how, sure, lynchings were illegal and executions are legal, but the line between them can get very fuzzy. One story that was really compelling to me in the book is that there was a man named Dick Garrett who was executed in the first decade of the 20th century. And he was put on trial, and it was a legal trial. Technically, his constitutional rights were not violated. It was a 4-hour-long trial over whether he was going to get the death penalty for committing murder. And while he was in the courtroom, he could hear the sound of saws and hammers outside because they were already building the scaffold, because the sort of outcome of this trial was a sort of foregone conclusion. And that was an example that Reeser brought up in her own writing, and that I point to as evidence of how thin that line can be between the lynchings, that we think of as the past, and the executions that the state came to carry out throughout the 20th century.
There's a couple of things I just want to dig in a little bit more on. That these lynchings, of course, took place sort of like as a way of ending Reconstruction, mm-hmm. and bringing in this new era of really of blowback or pushback or of new white supremacy that we have talked about on this program quite a bit. The rise of the KKK in that era, and starting to put up all the statues of Southern generals and Confederate war heroes, as it were. But this idea that the state lawmakers in Texas were justifying executions as a way of preempting lynchings. Can you talk about that a little bit more in that the fuzziness? I mean, I can see the sort of the metaphor there with you can hear them building the gallows before the verdict comes. Like this is a foregone conclusion. We're just now adding in a layer of sort of respectability to this lynching. Where else? Like what other elements of this? Center around it? Is it race? Is it the way that they publicize and demonize? Is it what are the other elements that sort of satiate? I guess what is being satiated?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I mean, and I should say it's not just Texas legislators. There were members of the Supreme Court who also said if we don't have the death penalty, we're going to risk having, illegal vigilante justice and mob killings of people. And again, there was sort of no real evidence to back that up, but it's the argument that these, members of the Supreme Court made. I think that in Texas, there's been a sort of particular cultural story about what's getting satiated in terms of justice that gets told that kind of clouds the picture. And so while lynchings in Alabama and Georgia and Florida were primarily associated with race historically, in Texas, they also primarily fell upon, Black men, and often after accusations of, having sex with a white woman. It's a very common thing that would happen in Texas just as much as the other southern states. But when Texans talk about lynching, they have a different image in mind. They have a kind of, like I said before, John Wayne movie of, stringing up the cattle rustler, right? The sort of white cowboys going after the guy. And it's dirty. Yes, it's unfortunate. It's kind of a regrettable necessity of the frontier. There was a famous television ad in the 90s for Pace Salsa where they find out they're eating, these cowboys find out they're eating salsa that was made in New York. And they look at the chef and they say, "Get a rope." And there's just this very flip attitude towards lynchings. Born of the idea that they're a kind of nostalgic relic of the frontier rather than a tool of, maintaining a racial caste order in the wake of the Civil War, and in the founding of Texas, which we, as historians and scholars and journalists know that's the history. But there's this kind of cultural story that it's really just about punishing, white cowboys, right? That gets told that I think, allows race to get subsumed. And then over the course of the 80s and 90s, I read dozens of trial transcripts, and you see that race gets subsumed even further. So they never say, that Black man is going to go, and if we don't execute him, he's going to go and rape and kill more people. They say, these monsters roaming the streets, we're not safe in our beds at night because those people are running around, killing innocent Americans. And they don't say race, they don't say Black people, but you can start to read it between the lines. And it's the same era in which, crime and a fear of crime becomes a kind of coded way of talking about race in politics, right? Under Nixon and Reagan. So this is just a part of the bigger story.
And Maurice, just connecting it back to Texas as well, because I think it being so central to what you wrote about is just key. How Rick Perry and other politicians coming out of Texas use the carrying out of executions and like record breaking. I mean, I remember Rick Perry on the debate stage bragging about how many people he would execute. And I know you wrote about that as well, how he broke records. How that's still so integral to the politics of that state now, and how it's like hard for some Northern people like myself to understand, but how all of that history culminates in the politics of the state even today.
It's true. And there's a great anthropologist who wrote like a PhD dissertation that I read in which she interviewed all these people who had served on juries in Texas and sentenced people to death. And they never say they themselves have these cultural ideas, but they say, oh yeah, where I'm from in whatever town, people just want to string them up. Like there's this sort of idea that we all believe this as Texans. I found in the research a lot of sort of just cultural references that go beyond the debate stage. The comedian Ron White making flip jokes about executions, or on SNL or The Simpsons. It's this idea that Texas is the epicenter of the death penalty and executions, and that it comes from this old cowboy culture. I think there have been moments where running for president, George W. Bush or Rick Perry have confronted some questions and sort of antagonism from people for whom the death penalty is a relic. People confronting them on the debate stage in other states, in Iowa or New York. But in Texas, it's a selling point still politically and culturally. I do think that's starting to change. I mean, a lot of our bigger cities, not just Austin, but Houston and Dallas, have become more diverse. You have district attorneys running for office in these counties that are saying, we're not going to seek the death penalty as often anymore. And they have, again, more diverse and sort of democratic leaning voter bases in those big cities. So I do think you're seeing things start to turn the corner in line with the larger kind of cultural shift in Texas that, again, I'm not one of those people who think Texas is going to turn blue tomorrow, but you can see the signs of change.
I don't want to get too hung up on the Texas thing, but I'm really fascinated by this, and I'm fascinated by the sort of the myths that we have, not just this, but things like the lost cause and whatnot, that we build to hide sort of the underlying realities. And I grew up on a lot of Westerns as a kid. And I keep thinking about Hang 'em High, which is that Clint Eastwood movie about hanging. And so much of it was about, we can't get the guy back to, we're too far away to the central, the one jail that we have. So we're going to hang him here because I'm not going to be able to bring this guy back alive. And that whole notion of like, overtaxed, and not overtaxed, but overmatched lawmen, and, their inability to bring people to justice, and they got to do it right there because otherwise this guy's going to go free. I mean, that whole sort of mythos in some respects feels like it was developed, you had this massive expanse of space. And so you could develop this myth on some level, but it really probably was just covering up for a certain amount of viciousness. And then ultimately sort of to hide this sort of racial component of the story.
Yeah. Another example I often bring up for people is the Alamo, which is like the sort of foundational myth of Texas that many Americans have heard about. And we, growing up in Texas, hear the story about the sort of celebratory, that they lost at the Alamo, but then they got victory, not long after that. But many of these sort of foundational figures in Texas history held these same very pernicious views of race and slavery. They were very afraid of, freed slaves taking over Texas. And they developed these myths to try to kind of cloud the picture for people and give them not necessarily a bloodlust support for the death penalty, but this idea that you're describing. It's almost like with a sigh, oh, it's a regrettable necessity. It's too bad we have to have it, but we're too far from the courthouse and the jail, so let's just do it. And of course, that's couldn't be further from the truth today, but these ideas still circulate with a fair amount of nostalgia.
And we should also mention, Rick Perry, but Bill Clinton, sort of to project, and we could probably talk for hours on what the theory was amongst his campaign, because he was dealing with the idea that he was a draft dodger and this and that, needed to project some measure of strength, I guess. But he ordered the execution of Ricky Rector, I think his name was, who was an African-American man who I can't remember the specifics, but had a particularly low IQ. Tell us just more about that story and how that plays into this.
Sure, absolutely. So I think the political context that's worth noting there is that the death penalty became a kind of culture war issue and a political touchstone in the 80s and 90s. Many people remember the Willie Horton ad where Dukakis, was accused of letting a man out to rape and kill. But Dukakis also faced questions on the debate stage about what would happen if his wife was raped and murdered. Would he support the death penalty? And the fact that he seemed weak on that issue to voters was really unhelpful for him. And so, 4 years later, Bill Clinton is running for president. He gets a lot of accusations that he's liberal and wishy-washy and needs to project an image of toughness. And he flies home from the campaign trail to preside over an execution of this man, Ricky Rector. Ricky Rector was African-American, and he had actually suffered brain damage, I think, from a bullet that hit him in the head when he killed a police officer. And so he was psychologically, very diminished and did not really understand what his execution was about. The famous anecdote that I find very chilling from that is that he had a last meal, and at the end of the last meal was a piece of pie, and he said, I'm going to store that and put it in the fridge and eat it later. And didn't really understand that it was his own last meal. And Bill Clinton got a lot of flack for that on the left. And I've even seen people on the right who support the death penalty, bring that up as an example of his particular callousness. I think a lot of political leaders today regret how they use the death penalty in ways that look very callous to our modern eyes. I mean, one of them is President Biden, right? In the Senate in the early 90s, he was touting a bill and he said, in this bill, it's great. We do everything but hang people for jaywalking. And again, with the word hang kind of evokes this sort of old mythology. Now Biden says that he opposes the death penalty, but he's sort of not alone. There's been a whole sea change, I think, in the Democratic Party where they've come to see that the punishment is problematic. And there's a question of sort of going forward, how much of a priority they make it and how much they try to bring the right along.
Well, there's like this, after effect from all of the law and order push by the Republican Party, Nixon, Reagan, like that was so central to those campaigns. And then you talk about the after effects in the 90s of Timothy McVeigh, and how that kind of allowed for the public to stomach the notion of a death penalty. But what's so saddening about that is obviously he was an outlier, a massive outlier, because a lot of this affects poorer people and traditionally Black people as well. So can you talk about that moment as how it punctuated this conversation or pushed it forward?
Absolutely. So in the early 90s, there was a series of bills in which we vastly expanded the federal death penalty. Again, Biden and a lot of Democrats were involved with this. And there was a tension politically, or not politically, I should say, just sort of practically speaking, where they wanted executions to happen faster and more regularly, and they wanted to shorten appeals, but they also didn't want people on death row to be, deprived of lawyers with the risk of someone potentially innocent being executed or, with their constitutional rights sort of grossly violated. Biden was involved in he was a former public defender himself, and he was trying to navigate that very narrow path. And the political conversation was kind of going along behind the scenes. Democrats and Republicans disagreed, but they were sort of hashing out these different bills. And then the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And that really transformed the debate, because it seemed like any effort to give more constitutional rights to death row prisoners would be helping someone like Timothy McVeigh. That wasn't really true, because Timothy McVeigh sort of uniquely actually gave up his appeals and said, I don't want to fight my execution. I just want to be executed. And that's part of why he was executed only a few years later. But that political, transformation meant that Congress pushed through a bill in 1996 called the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. And it had very little to do with terrorism, and it primarily reduced the ability of people on death row to file appeals. There was this idea that they were, stringing their cases along for decades as they just raised one unimportant issue after another and forced all the judges and courts to visit them. That was a bit of a myth. I mean, there were real constitutional issues in these cases, but in the wake of that bill, which is not very famous, but I think very important, not just for the death penalty, but the whole criminal justice system, it just became a lot harder if you were in prison to get a court to listen to your new evidence that you were innocent or that, you had brain damage and shouldn't be executed for that reason, right? It really hampered the ability of prisoners to get their claims heard in court.
Just the way that Emma phrased that question, where an outlier became the story that provided cover to maintain the sort of racially biased system is analogous to, what we saw with the entire outgrowth of the of so-called capital punishment. All right. So going back to the response from that 1972 case,
sure.
Texas reshapes the way that they're going to operationalize the capital punishment. They write a statute, essentially says that there needs to be the jury needs to answer three questions. Was the killing unprovoked? Was it deliberate? And does this person represent a continuing threat to society, more or less? And you write that the authors of this bill ultimately were like a little bit unsure that they had really cracked the code, as it were. So the capital punishment comes sort of roaring back. The Supreme Court revisits the question in a case versus Texas in 1976, Jurek v. Texas. Mm-hmm. And then, so basically, what do they decide at that point?
So in 1976, Texas is one of a bunch of states that have brought back the death penalty, and every state has written a somewhat different law. And the Supreme Court has to decide, are we going to bless all of these laws or none of them or just some of them? And they decide that the harshest laws, which came out of North Carolina and Louisiana, which effectively made the death penalty mandatory for certain kinds of crimes. You kill a police officer, there's no, question. You just go straight to death row if you're found guilty. They decided that that was too harsh and that the juries should be allowed to actually look at the sort of individual life circumstances of the person they're sentencing. They should be able to look at whether they feel remorse or whether they were abused as a child, sort of all the things that we now hear about in death penalty cases. So North Carolina, Louisiana said none of that. The Supreme Court said, yes, you have to have that. And so they strike down those very harsh laws. The Texas law isn't technically mandatory, but it also really limits the ability of juries to hear that kind of information because those three questions are very simple. And even to this day, you will hear prosecutors say to members of a jury, you don't have to decide whether or not this man is going to live or die. You just have to answer these three questions. And so it allows them to kind of offload responsibility. And the scholars who have kind of looked at this future dangerousness question have found that, asking juries to predict whether somebody's going to commit crimes in the future and making the death sentence based on that question, on the one hand, it can't be done. There's really no meaningful way to predict the future. But second of all, it opens the door to a lot of fear-based arguments from prosecutors. It also allows them to kind of spin, negatives into positives, or they can. So, for example, this person is seriously mentally ill, and where in Florida or some of these other states, the defense lawyers can bring the evidence of mental illness to say this is a reason to spare this person's life. In Texas, when it's used to answer that question, it just becomes, oh, they're seriously mentally ill, so they can't have remorse, and they are going to definitely kill someone again, right? And it gives prosecutors this tool to kind of speed these cases along towards execution. So it's a very wonky story, but I wanted to tell it because I think it's a really crucial thing to understand about why Texas became the epicenter from a legal perspective.
So we had the death penalty come roaring back to the point where a presidential candidate in 93, I guess 92, flies off the campaign to make a real show of this. I mean, this is I don't want to be glib about it, but it was like how can I top that Sister Souljah moment on some level for Bill Clinton? And but then what happens from like 94 to, let's say, 2019? And I date that before, Donald Trump, had the opportunity to sort of execute his plan to up executions, 11, I think it was, since July, federal executions. But how did the death penalty, how did the fall come?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think the peak is a little later. You have Clinton flying home, but executions really peak around 99, 2000. And this is when George W. Bush is running for president. And the fact that he has overseen the biggest, death penalty system in the country is a major feature of that electoral campaign. It wasn't the center of it because it's not like Gore was out there opposing executions. But there were a handful of big scandalous cases that made Bush look sort of bad to the left and lended a kind of circus atmosphere to the Texas death penalty in those days. There was the case of Gary Graham, where he was a black man who was potentially innocent, and the Black Panther Party and the Ku Klux Klan were out there in the streets in Huntsville outside the execution chamber protesting. CNN was covering it. There were these big dramatic cases that I think really forced Americans to look at these questions of, are we getting it right? Is someone innocent getting, potentially going to be executed? And then there was the case of Carla Faye Tucker, a woman who had a very dramatic conversion to Christianity on death row and seemed very redeemed. And I think that led a lot of evangelicals to question capital punishment. So you have these big cases, and something kind of breaks in those years. George Bush is, of course, elected. Shortly after that, 9/11, one argument I've heard is that 9/11 kind of shifts the sort of orientation of fear for Americans away from violent criminals who commit murder and to, terrorism cases and, the 9/11 hijackers. And so there's less of a sort of obsession with carrying out lots of death sentences and executions politically. Because who the sort of enemy is has changed. And then in the midst of all that, quietly, you have defense lawyers who are getting better at just case by case convincing juries to spare the lives of people, even those who have committed really terrible crimes. I mean, there's a dramatic Houston case from 2008 in which a man who was undocumented, who had been charged with sexual assault in the past, who had been deported and come back to the United States, is here in the country without documentation and kills a police officer. And this would have been the kind of textbook case for the death penalty in Texas. And his lawyer, Dana Lynn Reeser, whose story I tell in the book, manages to convince a jury to spare this man's life by doing just a lot of research on his life and finding the sort of stories and the way of understanding him that doesn't excuse the crime or the murder of a police officer, but just gives them enough information to say this man's life is worth sparing. And in case after case that happens, and so year by year, the number of new death sentences goes into decline. Prosecutors start to realize how expensive these cases are, and they can't afford to seek death sentences at a certain point. And politically, it just becomes a little less charged. All of these things sort of combine and gel, and the number of new death sentences and executions starts to tick down year by year. And I should say that Trump, of course, oversaw 13 executions, more than any president in decades. But the number of new death sentences and even the number of executions, even with those Trump executions, has been still in decline. And once Trump is no longer carrying them out, I think we're going to see over the next few years very, very low numbers.
So this is a story of, in terms of the diminishment of this in practice, right? Is this sort of, symbiotic relationship between like the Innocence Project showing that there, it's flawed, that convictions can be flawed, and lawyers, arguing to juries why you should spare someone's life, and the juries coming from society and have gotten this message that the death penalty can be flawed, that crime, in addition to terrorism maybe supplanting the big fear for Americans, is also at a record sort of decline in crime that is taking place across the country. I don't want to get into my whole lead theory and et cetera, but it's happening across the country, regardless really of what police departments are doing in any given place. And so the experience of crime that your average American has goes down significantly over this time. So all these things begin to feed into each other, and there's sort of like a virtuous, I would consider it, circle of a feedback loop. So how do we get? So is this a story? This is a story in many respects of something that's incremental in many respects. But where do we take this next big leap to? And I guess the moratorium that was placed under Obama for the federal executions, was that under Obama?
He had a sort of unofficial moratorium, and now we're waiting to see whether Biden also has one, right?
And so what is the next? Is there anything that can take us to that next level where it's like we've shut the door on it? I mean, is it statutory, a federal statute? Could that control what states do, or?
It couldn't control what states do. So even if, and there is a bill in Congress now to abolish the federal death penalty, I don't know, I can't, handicap its chances of success. But even if that were to pass, that would not do away with the death penalty, because Texas, a lot of other states, Florida, Missouri, would still keep carrying them out. And those states, at least politically, seem extremely unlikely to stop executing, right, and stop carrying out death sentences. Biden could do certain complex things around federal incentives that sort of incentivize states to not carry out executions, whether that's guaranteeing them better lawyers, more funding. But it's really an incremental story. And I think that series of next steps that take us from a very diminished death penalty to no death penalty at all are going to be a lot of time and effort, and it might take a very long time. But that said, I think that there's sort of a bigger lesson in all of this, which is that a lot of the arguments about whether someone's capable of redemption or mercy, are not uniquely connected to the death penalty. These questions also, circle around cases where we consider whether to send someone to prison for the rest of their life, right, without the possibility of parole at all, right, 60 years, a virtual life sentence. We still give them to people who are, 18, 19 years old. And I think that a cultural debate will shift, even if there are still executions, that kind of cultural conversation about justice and mercy and redemption for people who commit very serious crimes might shift away from just talking about the death penalty and more to these cases of essentially just throwing someone in prison for the rest of their lives.
So it'll be more of a question of carceral reform. Yeah.
I mean, I think that part of the point of the book for me and the research was to say that, we think of the death penalty in isolation, but it's connected to the whole justice system. It's sort of the symbolic pinnacle of a very punitive justice system. And you take the death penalty away, or mostly take it away, and that then becomes a debate about sort of the next harshest punishments.
And the Supreme Court is completely impossible at this point. Was there any period of time over the past 30 years where there was a court that might have been amenable to saying, you know what, we now that we've evolved as a society, we realize the state should not have the ability to premeditatedly kill someone?
Oh, absolutely. I think there was a chance the Supreme Court might have done that even 4 years ago. There was a conversation at the time going on among defense lawyers about, can we bring a big dramatic case to the court in which they strike down the death penalty once and for all? Some, cynics said that's a fool's errand. It's not going to happen. But it really all came down to whether Anthony Kennedy might, having, over the course of many years, sort of shown that he was uncomfortable with at least some death sentences. There was this question of maybe he could be pulled over to join the four liberals and say, no more death penalty. But then Trump was elected, and of course we all know the story of how he got through 3 nominees, and that reshaped the court dramatically. And so now it is, at least to me, barring some really big ideological conversion among multiple conservatives on the court, it seems unlikely that the Supreme Court would take a big swing like that.
Well, it's a fascinating story how what I consider a horrible institution in this country has been, at the very least, diminished, and at least in practice, we're getting close to being able to strangle it in the bathtub, as it were. Maurice Chammah, the book is "Let the Lord Sort Them: The Rise and the Fall of the Death Penalty." Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate being here.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. Not bake. We're going to take
quick break, huh?
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. All right, folks, that just about does it for us. We are, of course, going to be talking more later in the program about the COVID relief bill. We are now in February. Joe Biden's been the president for 10 and a half days, I guess. Calendar days, not work days. But we shall see. Hopefully we'll get some reports as to what comes out of these talks he's having with the 10 Republicans. And of course, it's going to be
hopefully nothing, by the way. Hopefully nothing.
I would like, one of the arguments that you hear is, okay, have them pass whatever, a $600 billion bill, an $800 billion bill, and do it through regular order. 60, it would be 60 to 40. You would see the bill passed. You would achieve that sort of filibuster threshold, and then the idea is then come back and do the rest through reconciliation. But as a political matter, you risk weakening the spine, as it were, or increasing the reluctance, however you want to frame this, of folks like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and maybe even John Tester, because you have provided some relief, so the urgency is not there as much. And then on the other hand, you give the Republicans credit for something that, frankly, they don't deserve any credit for. If you're going to, if the Republicans...
And it's needed now. Like the urgency is now too, The
urgency is now. And if you're going to say that you understand the urgent need of Americans, then suck it up and provide them more help than maybe you want to give them. I mean, it's just unbelievable that that's the way that it's phrased. But we will talk more about that as the days go on. If you missed any part of this show, you can check it out on the Peacock app, on the Choice channel. We will see you tomorrow. For those of you who are sticking around, good for you.
Yeah,
a lot to talk about. I'm feeling a little better. Emma, I want to thank you for taking over the show on Friday.
No problem.
I had some weird, I'm not quite sure what it was, but I think they call it torticollis or something like that. I had some type of pinched nerve in my head.
Oh,
like
man.
I still have very little movement on my neck, but
did you see a doctor about it?
Well, I spoke to a doctor.
Okay.
Does this bring you any closer to a chiropractor visit, maybe?
No way. I got suggested one, and I was like, no way. I think I slept on it wrong, and I hadn't been sleeping well.
Why are you anti-chiropractor?
Your loss. Yeah, no, this is a series of debates that the
I've
Majority Reporter
heard
in the past
incredible
years.
things from like a lot of friends about the what.
Chiropractic is a bit quackish on occasion. I mean, I would look up some lawsuits in England with Simon Singh. They sued him for questioning some of their methods. I think it's a little bit of placebo taken advantage of, and the lack of therapy you can get in our actual health systems. But I mean, some people have good results. So
Yeah, but they crack your back, and it's like
yeah, that's not good though. That can be bad. Actually,
I've never been, but I've had people crack my back for me, and it is incredible.
There is like loose cracking of backs as opposed to like sort of someone who's in there really trying to manipulate. Look, different strokes for different folks. For me, not going to do. Doctor gave me a little bit of prednisone, which is scary medication as far as I'm concerned, but short term, it has really done wonders for me. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. We should say Jamie's not going to be joining us today. She's snowed in. She'll join us on Wednesday. In the meantime, Nomi's show is off today. Make sure you check it out. Tomorrow, and I want to make it clear, I'm not disparaging chiropractors. I just don't like people touching me that much. And so that's basically it.
Okay, that adds up. Yeah. I mean, I don't know anything about chiropractic, but when I did, I used to do Pilates at this place. And then
Pilates is great. I used to do that.
But they'd like at the end kind of stretch me out, and sometimes my back would crack. And I was like, this is the best thing I've ever experienced.
Yes. I mean, I just don't like to be I don't want to be manipulated in any way, fashion or otherwise.
Got it.
And all right, so Nomi's show, she'll be back tomorrow. Obviously, check it out. The Nomi Keys Show at youtube.com. And check out the Antifada. They're Twitch streaming now, twitch.tv/the Antifada. Matt, what's happening on the Matt Leckian media universe?
David and I did the Left Reckoning with Jen Pan of the Jacobin Show last Thursday. Check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. Just a reminder, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget to check out justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. These are movement buddies, folks, in Madison, Wisconsin. They also have great coffee. You can also find the Majority Report blend. So use the coupon code Majority, get 10% off. And don't forget the AM Quickie every morning, AM Quickie. All right, see you in the fun half.
And for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost has what?
The alpha males are back, 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 back.
You're a madman!
And the alpha males are back, back, back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dennerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are...
Psych. Fuck them. Fuck them.
Almost has what? Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black Africans. And the alpha males are back, 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 back. And the Africans are black, 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 black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck 'em. Fuck 'em. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black. Alpha males are back, back. Africans are black, black.
Come on! Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy. Pussy.
Going to the IMs for a moment.
Hello.
This is from Spay F. Could I please get a shofar for my wife, Linda? I lost her to cancer last night after an 8-year fight. I'm so sorry to hear that, Spay F, longtime listener of the program, and I am really...
That's awful. I'm so sorry.
This is for Linda. Really sad to hear that. Hang in there. I'm again really sorry to hear that. A lot of people who are responding to the chiropractors. The last thing I want to do is weigh in on this.
I don't really have a strong chiropractor opinion. I'm just curious about your opinion and want to explore that further.
My whole perspective on my health is as little intervention as possible. And if I can minimize it, that's like, even like the doctor suggested a certain amount of dosage on the prednisone. And I did it on the first day. I felt better. I started to cut back on it a little bit more because if I can avoid taking stuff, I will. If I can avoid, I would never get back surgery. I mean, I would wait 6 to 8 months of long time pain because I'm just convinced that there's too many people out there who are incentivized to do stuff rather than sort of I don't get into holistic. I'm not against medicine. I try and tap the brakes a little bit.
Now, that's close to my philosophy too. I mean, even I get a little into holistic stuff too, but I will take both. But if say something's really bothering me, I mean, I use coconut oil instead of moisturizer. I mean, I guess that's not medicine, but I like using natural things instead. I rarely ever take Advil unless I need to, some stuff like that.
I don't hesitate on the Advil as much, although a little bit, but I just for instance, I've had a knee problem for a while, and I'm just, my theory is I'm just going to keep walking. And for the most part, things work out. Like it was now almost 20 years ago. I guess it was close to that. I was doing a lot of Taekwondo. I think it was in like my mid 30s. And I thought I think I was like 34. And I was like, you know what? If I don't box now, I'm never going to box. But I also wanted to continue with like the Taekwondo, a little bit of that, because I enjoyed that. So I went to do some Muay Thai at a gym in New York City. And at that time, it was a real Muay Thai gym. You know, now you can't afford to have a gym like that in Manhattan. But at the time, it was
What's the difference between that and just like a regular boxing?
It's not a
gym?
workout place.
Yeah.
It was like a gym where they would have boxing, Muay Thai boxing. It was
okay.
Not,
there's definitely gyms like that in New York. I've gone to boxing classes in New York.
Yeah, no,
they just have bags.
There was no, it's not, there's no, like the classes. It wasn't like it was there. There was like 5 guys and they were all just in incredible shape. And I was in decent shape at that time, but these guys were just nuts. And there was no ramping up to this. And in Muay Thai, you don't kick with your knee at all. You just swing your entire leg. And I did it for like 2 days. And I was like, this is hard. And I did it. And then I went to go play basketball after, I was an actor at the time. So I didn't have anything to do except for basically just go play basketball after. And I went to go play basketball after I'd done this Muay Thai. I went for a layup. My back collapsed. And I did a bunch of core Pilates style stuff to sort of recover from it. And to this day, when I do this, I still get numbness in my left knee. But I was like, you know what? If that's the thing that I got to live with, fine, because I just know too many people who got back surgery and then they were destroyed. So
yeah, can I get my take on alternative medicine, which is that obviously the problem is capitalism has taken over the healthcare industry, but I think too many people frame alternative medicine as palliative of the evils of that system when it's actually predatory. And I'm not saying chiropractors are among those, although I think they do dabble in certain things like that. Maybe more so in Europe than here, but all alternative medicine, those are people that are those are capitalists in an unregulated market, basically, oftentimes. So I think it's worthy of skepticism.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 401 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, one sec. I'm taking you off Bluetooth. Sorry.
I don't know. You sound all right, actually, I got to say. So go ahead.
Wait, I'm coming right now. Okay. I'm off Bluetooth. How you doing, Sam? It's Jesse from Massachusetts.
Jesse from Massachusetts. Where in Massachusetts, dude, if you don't mind?
Well, I grew up in Seekonk. It's right on the Providence line.
Dude, I know where Seekonk is. All right, go ahead.
So, yeah, I was just calling because I was raised as a homeschool evangelical Christian. And I'm sorry. I was raised as a homeschool evangelical Christian. And I was involved with politics strongly. I worked with the Madison Project. It's a super PAC. They would pull homeschoolers out, like Virginia, Kentucky. Wasn't allowed to, date without being betrothed, hang out with people of other denominations, whatever. So my friend moved to New York. She started sending me kind of just hours of tapes of your show. She was obsessed with Janine.
Wow.
And
wait a second.
Let
me ask you this. Sorry. So your friend, was she also homeschooled, or where did you know your friend from?
So yeah, she was homeschooled. Kind of her mom was sort of a hippie.
Okay.
And she ended up going to this thing called Team Pact, which was just kind of like a student government. Kind of like we go into the state capitol and debate bills or whatever. So she kind of just randomly ended up there.
Interesting. Okay.
So I guess the point of what I was just calling to say was, she spent years, trying to kind of not convert me, but just kind of just speak into my life. And she'd send me hours and hours of your show. I had you, and I had this Focus on the Family teen show, this awful call-in show, Dawson McAllister. I was really, really, really isolated. And I mean, it took 7 years of, of just being exposed to it. And there was this kind of thing where they wanted to go protest gay marriage, the same thing called Madison Project. And, I had that in the back of my mind combined with the stuff I learned from you or, was exposed to by you and Janine. And like, I mean, I've been, I guess my point was more that like, even beyond electoral politics, you may not be able to convert people right away or at all. It's just profoundly affected my life, my relationships, my relationships with my kids, my friends, my social life in general. I have so much meaning and just kind of like profound change that happened. And yeah, I eventually started voting and, doing volunteer work, etc. That took years. And I just think it's like important for people, and especially if you can speak the language of Christianity. I still keep in contact with everybody from my church, and some of them are gone and some of them are not. Stuff like gay marriage and Medicare for all is so popular with Republicans, even if they'll never vote for it. And they're just probably more open, from having been exposed to those things from people that they care about.
So what was it? I mean, I'm curious because you're listening to Focus on the Family radio hour or whatever it was. And Janine and I on the Majority Report, I do not think that we had the Christian vernacular down.
Oh, you did not. I mean, I was kind of forced. I mean, I was forced into it. So, I got 7 years old, worrying about going to hell all of the time. Things did not feel right.
How old were you? How old were you when your friend went down to New York? I mean, presumably like in your 20s or your teens, right?
Yeah, I think I was 16.
Okay. Wow.
15. So, and I mean, yeah, we had been talking for years, and she never pressed it down my throat, never, shoved it down my throat, but it was just, there's something wrong. I just felt weird with the war in Iraq. Like I remember being very angry. Actually I must've been 13. Sorry. I remember being very angry about the war in Iraq. And angry about, about this other country doing this to us. And as I began to realize that was wrong, maybe a little bit of Michael Moore, but it really was just listening to your show, really having no other outlet.
That is, I'm going to cut this and send this to Janine. I think she will really appreciate it. But so tell me what happened with your, and I appreciate it too, but tell me what happened with your parents. Like, what's your relationship with your family now that you have like, I mean, do you still identify as Christian? Do you like, how did it play out with your family?
To be honest, I mean, with my family, they're kind of aware that I, have like agnostic points of view. With the people from my church or whatever, I really just talk to them the way I would have before. I haven't said whether or not I am or am not. I think that if you look at Christianity at face value, especially the New Testament, a lot of what you guys talk about, a lot of what we believe as progressives, the Bible is those things. So it's very, there's the QAnon thing, and you really can't talk to people like that. For everybody that's just sort of like, just pushing around like their own struggles with health insurance or whatever, these things seem to be really appealing to them. And, I will just kind of talk to them the way that I was talked to in church.
Interesting. And
I appreciate,
well, I'm just curious as to like what, so for something like Medicare for all, as people are struggling with health insurance, let's say, for instance, or even let's say this COVID relief, how do you bridge that gap? Like you start talking about it and you go like, you can't, say what you will about Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey. They would support us getting health insurance. Cause I imagine Elizabeth Warren is way down on the list that some of the folks at church appreciate. Right. I mean,
for sure. It's almost our kind of hatred of other people. I was really surprised to see people finally understand that Mitch McConnell is their enemy. I feel like after COVID, there's been so much stuff that we're all kind of on the same page with, at least identifying the issue, but we come to these different things. And so either you really do go get lost. And I've seen like half of my friends from church are educated, 4-6 year degrees, like I've just gone. That other 50%, I wouldn't necessarily mention Elizabeth Warren. A lot of them do like Bernie. I'm trying to think of the guy from Ohio. I'm having a little bit of a blank.
Sherrod Brown.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
Sherrod Brown or
Rod Brown. Yeah.
I'm really sorry. I can't think of. He's just an extremely kind of progressive, but also blue collar politician. Or he comes off as
Sherrod Brown.
Yes, like I have friends that are Christians that love, or they're more conservative that love that guy. Love the way he talks. There's this I think this happens on both the left and the right. There's some kind of anger towards the elites, quote unquote, and just finding either ways to speak to people and saying this really is the most Christian thing to do. And kind of break them out of this idea that it's socialism, or just talking about how this would profoundly affect your own life, and stuff like the moral stuff. Some of it's difficult. My dad is pro-life, and he absolutely hates Democrats, and he voted for Biden, but voted for in Massachusetts. There's kind of a late-term abortion bill that was up, I think a couple months ago, and that for him can't vote for a Democrat. Besides for Biden, because you need to have either that kind of splitting of power or whatever, because they're just going to bring late-term abortion bills. I mean, that is something that I honestly don't know how to approach, and that's not something that I can. But sometimes just getting people to at least accept the policies are not a bad thing, kind of. You know what I mean?
Well, that's really.
But even if we're doing it, and they're just their party's out of power, but there's a ton of people that support Biden's agenda. But not Biden. They think he's actually not even, really president, or not rightfully president, but they actually overwhelmingly support, the COVID relief. Maybe even just having people not be just so resistant to it if when Democrats are in power to be able to do these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Give me 3 or 4 words that are, that when you hear them, that you're talking to a Christian.
Okay. So often, you definitely put me on the spot here.
Right,
if you're talking to somebody who has that kind of spiritual vibe, like Nina Turner, if she wasn't so obviously progressive, people would love her. That way of you say, my brothers and sisters, in Christ, sometimes they'll use the term fisher of men, which is just you're supposed to pull people into Christianity, but it's almost like if you feel like you should evangelize to people that are actually kind of used to the idea that we should be doing missionary work all the time.
What did you
Speaking
say?
about love
what
and Christ and selflessness and stuff has been kind of effective for me.
Fisher of men.
Okay. Oh, fisher as in
that's what Jesus fisher. Yeah, a person casting a fishing rod or something. That's because Jesus, with his disciples, that's what he would say.
So what I would say that Bernie Sanders, he's a real fisher of men.
Yeah, you could. The thing is definitely, I would say if you're not evangelical, people will see through that.
I got a feeling that somebody might see through that when I say that.
Definitely. I guess I would just encourage your listeners, if they have people that do trust them on an individual level and disagree with them, and like I said, even if you can't change their electoral politics, that it's important just to talk to people, and especially when we're losing people to this other thing. People recognize there's a wild problem, but they're just abandoning all logic and reason, because the thing is so real. We all know it. We can all feel it now. COVID's made it clear. And some people are saying, what can we do about it? And other people are saying, well, here's this other fantasy world.
Yeah, I think
it's really important to talk to people.
Well, Jesse, I appreciate the call. Let me just say, bless your heart. You're a great American.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Thank you. I love
all right,
that.
Sam, you got.
All right, thanks, man.
Sorry for
appreciate the
Have
call.
a good night. A good day.
You too. That's very gratifying.
Yeah. Look at that.
That's old school listening.
Yeah.
Listening on audio tapes from 2004.
It's the long game.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how else you listen to it unless you had real player. Calling from a 319. You don't even know what I'm talking about, do you? When I say real. Nope.
I'm just hoping we can move the conversation along past whatever you just said.
Calling from a 319 area code.
Aaron from Chicago.
Aaron from Chicago. What's on your mind?
I had a couple things. The first one was last Tuesday, you made mention of this briefly and never got around to it, but Brandon Straka was unfortunately arrested in relation to the insurrection. I haven't really seen the charges. I can only imagine, though, that and hope that one of them was that he apathetically steamrolled Capitol Police.
Yes. Yes.
And then the other one, on a more serious, would be, I don't know if there's anything in the COVID relief bill about repealing Trump's tax cuts, and if that is a possible avenue to try to get Republicans on board if they're going to go through reconciliation without them, to then, repeal them through reconciliation if the Republicans won't help get any sort of relief bill without.
I have actually a couple of articles that I've set aside to read about the disposition of the tax cut. My sense is that is something that they're probably going to try and go for in the second reconciliation bill. They're going to have 3 opportunities for a reconciliation between now and 2022 because the Republicans never used the one for this fiscal year. So they're actually going to have 3 fiscal years. Just off the top of my head, as a political matter, if I was advising Biden, I would say 2 things. As a political matter, I would say we need to get this money out the door. And that is in and of itself going to be a lift, right? We have no margin of error. Can't lose Manchin, can't lose Sinema, can't lose Tester, can't lose whomever it is, Mark Warner. When you, I personally don't feel that like you could roll back a lot of those taxes on the wealthy and the S corp provisions. I mean, a bunch of that stuff, and it would not have an austerity impact, as it were, on the economy. Broadly speaking, in general, taxation is a form of austerity unless you pump the money out on the other end, right? I mean, because you're taking, it is particularly the taxes that we have is the poorest sort of efficiency for any type of stimulus. But cutting taxes theoretically is stimulative to the government, to the economy. It's not particularly efficient. It may not even be 1-to-1 in terms of like if you were going to pump it out. In fact, I don't think it is. If you were to pump it out the other end. But unless there was an idea that if we roll back, if the issue was paid for, okay, by the Republicans, then I might push that more if I was advising Biden. Like if the idea was like, hey, if we can get this bill to be $1.9 trillion net, but we can actually spend $2.7 trillion because we could claw back, $800 billion worth of taxes. If I thought that was politically feasible, I would say to Biden, do it in this reconciliation. But I think the idea is get the money out the door now and worry about those tax cuts down the road. Because, look, the problem with the tax cuts is twofold. One, it's used as an excuse to promote austerity, right? Because look at our deficit, it's ballooned, blah, blah, blah. Well, they ballooned because of the tax cuts. Well, now we need to cut spending. And 2, it's an inequality issue. The first one seems to be basically nobody's talking about that, right? Like I don't even hear in the context of like, it's so anemic, the Republicans saying $1.9 trillion seems too much. You not even hear them utter the words deficit or debt in any serious way because they can't, because it's just blowing, because nobody cares. And they haven't they've abandoned that, 3 or 4 years ago. So the real issue is inequality. And I would just say that I think you've got to get the money to the people who need it right now. And if there was an easy way to roll back some of those taxes right now, I would do it. But at a 50, when you have a no vote margin, I just don't know if, that would slow things down dramatically, it seems to me. But I'm going to
Is there any appetite or desire to even roll them back on the Democrat side, or was that all like 2018 midterms?
I think if you had 8 more Democrats, 6 more Democrats in the Senate, you would see them rolled back a little bit. I don't think you'd see them rolled back totally, They're not, I've never seen them. Even when the Bush tax cuts sunsetted, they could have. Look, Bill Clinton raised taxes. And Obama brought them back up, not as much as he could have. I do think that there's an appetite. I just don't think that when you're talking about your winning votes are going to come from Manchin and Sinema. I don't know about Mark Kelly at this point, but maybe, Hickenlooper and Tester. I think you're in, Warner. I think you got a problem. But I think, the House would repeal them, I think, in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
So you think it's more of a second pass at reconciliation, and then
I
maybe
think that's when you're going to start to see the fight.
Deficits and deficit reduction.
Yep, I think you're going to end up seeing. I think you're going to see. Well, that's the thing is that I don't want Democrats to be talking about deficit reduction. I don't think that's the issue. I don't want to even push that.
I mean, if Republicans started screaming about the deficit, and then the Democrats could use the tax cuts to push those through and be more
it's possible. It's possible. I mean, I think the next reconciliation, they're going to want to do a big infrastructure stuff. I mean, we'll see. I'm going to read more into it, but I could just say that as a political matter, if I said to you, and as a policy matter, if I said to you, you can get, I don't know, a third of the Trump tax cuts repealed, but it's going to cost you another 4 weeks of negotiation, and and you risk losing one or two Democrats. All you need to do is lose one, and reconciliation is done for. Would you do that right now?
Well, why would it cost 4 weeks of negotiation? I mean, I understand the risk of Democrat piece, but then, what's the risk? Like, how are you going to get them through in the future if you're still going to risk the Democrats? Or are you saying because you need the money quicker now?
Yeah.
You don't want to risk.
Yeah, you might be able to
now.
sit down with Manchin and say, we're going to do these. We're going to roll back these tax cuts, and you can be sure that it's not going to hurt any of the specific constituencies that you represent, right? Like we're going to roll back the one that favors real estate. That's not a big issue for you. That's how this happens, right? It's like what taxes are we going to roll back? We're going to roll back the least offensive rollbacks to Sinema, Manchin, and whatever, the other 4 or 5 Democrats that you're going to deal with. And that takes time to figure out.
Yeah, I see your point.
Appreciate the call.
I guess
if it was up to me,
last thing, do you still have the Ask the Mom sound drop? I haven't heard that in a while.
We it's tough. We're, because of the way that we're producing the show now, it's just not easy to access those, but we still have it. They'll all come back at one point. I appreciate it. Thanks, Aaron.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
He really misses those. Really?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, eventually once we're all back in studio, we're going to have the full array.
There'll be a restoration.
Sam's chiropractor. Sam, we need to talk about something, and I don't mean you're back. You left us early last week, and Emma turned the rest of the show into a sports show. I had no idea. But,
I did not do that. That's outrageous. I actively discouraged calls about sports. I feel bad for our portion of the audience that doesn't watch. So that's exactly what happened. Matt Brendan attests to this. Have my back here.
Let's play this clip, because the people have to understand the context in which, the Democrats operate in. And this is what's sort of fascinating about what we've seen so far is there is less of this. I thought there was going to be a rush back to this, but it's amazing that we are less than 3 weeks out from less than 4 weeks out from a literal attack on the Capitol by Trump's supporters, where the Republican Party is now refusing to impeach Trump over this. And we've seen them do a 180 on this, at least Mitch McConnell, right? I mean, Mitch McConnell was saying secretly, I think this is important that we impeach Trump, blah, blah, blah. And yet, the mainstream media, ostensibly the most, liberal network, MSNBC, still retains this mythical vision of the Republican Party. It's never their fault. They have no agency. These lawmakers have no agency whatsoever. And here's Chuck Todd talking to Garrett Haake.
Here's what I'm trying to figure out. I assume if there were a secret ballot, there'd be a lot of House Republicans that say, "Hey, this is a bridge too far."
Pause it for one second. I'm sorry. He is talking about the idea of Marjorie Taylor Greene getting censured or kicked out of Congress because she's literally called within the past, 48 months for the assassination, 24 months of the assassination of Nancy Pelosi, which really, I don't know if there's a law against that, but that seems to be like a bad work environment.
At the very least, it's an HR concern.
Indeed. Right. She apparently also accosted Cori Bush. Cori Bush had to have her office moved because of too close proximity.
Comedians were visited by the FBI for saying a lot less than that.
Indeed. And so, this is somebody who should be kicked out. Instead, the caucus is meeting to see if they're going to get rid of Lynn Cheney from her leadership role. And I should be clear, I would expel Lynn Cheney just based upon her lineage if it was up to me. But this is where the center of the
You mean her lineage?
Yeah, exactly.
Because you keep saying Lynn. Yeah.
Oh, Liz Cheney. Sorry.
It's fine.
But this is where the party is. And so Chuck Todd is saying, I'm assuming they don't really want to do this and support her. And here's Garrett Haake, who does the reporting. So go to the beginning of this.
Here's what I'm trying to figure out. I assume if there were a secret ballot, there'd be a lot of House Republicans that say, "Hey, this is a bridge too far." Are there more than just a handful speaking up here, or is this just not going to happen?
I'm not sure that's a safe assumption, Chuck. I think this is kind of the reality that we're operating in under here. If there's no leadership condemnation here, there's no groundswell, there's not even quiet, off the record leaking. It's not like I know things but don't have members who are willing to go on the record complaining about it to tell you about it. This is part and parcel of a Republican Party, particularly in the House, that is a little bit unsure of their own base, of their own voters, and of the things that they believe and are pushing them. And I think that's part of the unsteadiness to condemn someone like Greene, is it's not clear, I think, to many of these elected representatives how many of their own constituents believe similar things to what she does.
But it's not just that, too. It's also, I've got some very bad news for Chuck Todd and for any commentator who wants to believe that the Republican Party, these elected leaders, have no agency and they are just being pulled around by their constituents. I'm sure there's some of it. I'm sure that's part of it. But I got news for you. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. And I think that it's just a matter of time before it's completely like this in the Senate. But it is virtually completely like this in the House. Come on.
Yeah. And of course they have agency, like you're saying, Sam, because part of why their constituents believe this and they're holding, are a lot in line with what Marjorie Taylor Greene believes is because of a deliberate inaction by the Republican Party to squash this in any real way because they thought it benefited them. And now they're doing the exact same thing behind closed doors, whispering maybe that they don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene, but that there's no indication that they'll act on. That's what he's saying. Right.
That's what he's hoping. He's projecting this on them. This is the amazing thing. Look, 75% of Republican voters believe that Donald Trump, in one way or another, actually won the election. Why would anyone assume that Republican elected leaders are any different from their constituents? This whole notion that he has in his head, they believe something different, but they've got to respond to their people, as opposed to the much more obvious assumption,
there have been reports that they're talking behind the scenes, and saying, "Oh, I don't think he actually won the election." Which I don't know what's worse, though, Sam. I don't know what's worse. We hear from the 25%. What my argument is that what Garrett Haake, who's doing the reporting, is saying, to be honest with you, no, I don't think they got a problem with this.
why would the assumption be that these Republican lawmakers represent anything different than what the Republican voter does? I'm not like, they're not so savvy that they're seeing, Congress people, they are true believers. A lot of these people are true believers. And just because you have people like Boebert in there who wants to pack, gun and Cawthorn, what's his name, want to go in there, just because they're completely, in bat crap crazy, doesn't mean that the rest of them aren't just like crazy. Just because they are willing to go out there and market themselves that way doesn't mean that these people don't believe it either.
I think there's like this cognitive dissonance by the media that you're hitting on here, right? Where they can't fathom that the suit and tie congressperson is just behind that, behind their, coiffed veneer is that Republican voter that they talk about, that they see in the polling, that they see, in terms of just the crazy things that they believe, not committed to, that aren't tied to reality. And it's the same cognitive dissonance that allow them to separate Donald Trump from the Republican Party. So there is this lauding of the esteemed Republican senator, the esteemed Republican congressperson that no longer exists anymore. And they are so slow on the uptake here. They are unable to reconcile those views, and it causes the coverage. I mean, I'm not saying there, but in many instances to suffer.
It's so cloying. It's so desperate to be like, can't we just pretend that the Republican Party are normal people? They're not. I'm sorry. They're not. And even if we get another clip, I want you to cue up clip number 5. Even if it's the case that the Republican Party, they're secretly normal, sane people who don't subscribe to the notion that lawmakers on the other side of the aisle should be assassinated. Even if they don't subscribe to those ideas, even if they don't subscribe to the QAnon beliefs or the idea that Donald Trump actually won the presidency, they are so craven and so incapable of separating from their constituents that it doesn't even matter. Like, bringing it up is irrelevant. Here is Asa Hutchinson. And I remember this dude when he was in Congress, taking the moral high ground about Bill Clinton having an affair. Here he is with Martha Raddatz. I want you to listen very carefully to what he says, how he characterizes Marjorie Taylor Greene's call for an assassination against Nancy Pelosi. Now, look, I would love Nancy Pelosi not to be the leader of the Democrats in the House. But I mean, put aside whatever your feelings are. You make this any generic politician. The idea that you would have a politician calling for the assassination of another politician, and you have evidence 3 weeks ago of where that type of talk leads, and you're running for, your governor. And I think he's term limited out. He's just afraid of I don't know what. Listen to this.
More question about a member of Congress, a new Republican member of Congress, Trump loyalist Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's long embraced conspiracy theories like QAnon, voiced support for executing Nancy Pelosi. Is she fit to serve, and should she be on the Education Committee?
Well, that's, first of all, the people of her district elected her, and that should mean a lot. They elected her, and she's going to run for re-election, and she'll be accountable for what she said and her actions. And then,
given her history, is she really fit to serve?
I'm not going to answer that question as to whether she's fit to serve because she believes in something that everybody else does not accept. I reject that, but she's going to stand for re-election. I don't think we ought to punish people from a disciplinary standpoint, a party standpoint, because they think something a little bit different.
What they think that's different is that Nancy Pelosi should be assassinated and that there's a cabal of pedophiles in the government that need to be rooted out.
No, you say different. It's a little different.
Sorry,
it's
my bad.
Little different. Can you imagine? Can you play that last part about that last part of that sentence again? I mean, that's absolutely nuts.
That everybody else does not accept. I reject that, but she's going to stand for re-election. I don't think we ought to punish people from a disciplinary standpoint, a party standpoint, because they think something a little bit different.
The obvious follow-up would be, was it wrong to censure Steve King then?
Yeah, or what was his view on the censuring of Ilhan Omar, by the way, which the Democrats gleefully threw her to the wolves there. And now we're seeing like the little drip about Marjorie Taylor Greene. At least Pelosi did come out against her, but she almost came out more quickly against censoring Ilhan Omar for manufactured, made-up anti-Semitic
without
comments,
a doubt,
which wasn't true. Yeah.
What would be a lot bit different? You know, some people say, should we assassinate Nancy Pelosi? Some people say, should we just campaign against her? It's a little different. I mean, the idea that these people are any way reachable. At what point is the American body politic going to understand the fever is not going to break? It is not going to break. We need to provide, I don't know what it's called, antibiotics, or we need to sort of maybe lop off an arm so that the infection doesn't spread. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but the fever is not breaking. It's not going to break.
Well, you know how you fix it is you beat them. You beat them, and then you make this kind of politics untenable, and then there's a regrouping. Just like, I mean, the way the Democrats, crawled back into their cave and tried to regroup during the Reagan years. And also, it was a change in politics that we obviously don't agree with in terms of the fact that they became more conservative, and Bill Clinton was the figurehead for that kind of politics. But they regrouped because Reagan won his second election in a massive landslide, and they were like, no, our kind of politics is untenable at this point. The Democrats need to do that to the Republicans. Do that. Destroy them. And then they change.
I mean, in many respects, when Barack Obama said, I cannot remember the exact quote, but he was interviewed and he said Ronald Reagan he thought was a monumental president in that way. There was a lot of us who were like, he's going to do to the Republicans what Reagan did to the Democrats. And nope, he did not.
Well, he had a killer instinct on the campaign trail when his name was on the ballot. But when it came to other Democrats, I'm going to take a back seat. So we had a huge missed opportunity there, but we have another bite at the apple, as you would say, Sam, here. Even though Biden's a much less charismatic figure, we are seeing some positive signs that potentially they could take a more aggressive approach to the Republicans because, God help us if they don't.
This is, when in doubt, the conservative machine is casting about now, looking for there's a certain desperation, I think, that's coming out because this whole attempt, Biden's, meeting with the 10 senators, and we'll see, I want to make it clear. I'm not a believer yet. However, it appears that what we are seeing is, in fact, the Biden administration just doing the pro forma stuff. Like you have a proposal, we will listen to it. But if they go ahead with the reconciliation, this is going to be a big deal because it's going to be the first time that I can remember in 20 years, maybe more, that you have a situation where the Democrats, and again, I think 1.9 is necessary but insufficient, but where Biden comes out with a number, says this is what we're going to pass. I'm going to give you an opportunity to get on board. You don't want to get on board, we're going to pass it anyways. This is something that I think is going to make it very difficult for the Republicans to respond to and the conservatives to respond to, because the unity thing is false anyways. This is really more something for the mainstream media and they're hoping for Democrats, but people it's not moving people. So what do? They cast about for stuff. And that is the idea that I don't know how many prisoners we still have at Guantanamo. It's a couple of dozen, maybe a little bit more. They were going to vaccinate them against COVID as a way of also protecting not just the prisoners, but also the guards, and relatively easy thing to do. But now it has become like a talking point for the conservative outrage machine. Here is Brian Kilmeade and Pete Hegseth on Fox and Friends. Pete Hegseth, the guy who cheered the pardoning of war criminals.
I mean, for a while, we wanted to keep them alive because they actually would help us with intelligence, whether they knew it or not. They would mention certain things, notice their body language, and help us get bin Laden and others. But they've been out of touch now for since 2001, so that they don't really have the contacts.
What's fascinating as they talk about these inmates, he's saying, like, they helped us get bin Laden. Not true.
Zero intelligence that shows that. Zero. No. And what was it? Half of Guantanamo prisoners who...
We had no affiliation at all with it. I mean, we've covered this many times. We can go back and listen to some interviews on this. But the amazing thing is how he hesitates to say 20 years? Like the idea that like we've been holding these people for 20 years in this sort of like nether world of jurisdiction and sort of outside the bounds of really like outside the bounds of our normally accepted law.
Zero habeas corpus, and they can't be brought up for trial, and it's dubious if they've actually done anything wrong, and it's a complete travesty. Yeah.
And you can't say 20 years because even for him, it makes him feel sick. So he just says 2001, go back, because he has to say, but 9/11 overcomes all sort of human objections you would have. Go back to the beginning.
Help us with intelligence, whether they knew it or not. They would mention certain things, notice their body language, and help us get bin Laden and others. But they've been out of touch now for since 2001, so that they don't really have the contacts. So you wonder why we just don't kill them, and put them on trial. They all should get the death penalty. And we already know the facts. Most of them have admitted to it. And now they're belligerent, and they're in our face, and they're laughing.
And it makes us look unserious. It makes us look, exactly. It makes us look unserious on the global stage. Look at those Americans 20 years later, can't figure it out. There will be no consequences. Lawyer up, and you're just fine.
Yeah, they really care about 9/11 and holding people to account, which is why literally every single fucking year, the Republicans try to block the 9/11 first responders bill because they don't want to pay for the first responders' health care. And the callousness with which Kilmeade says, let's just kill him.
Can you imagine?
Psychotic.
Can you imagine saying that we're considered unserious for not killing these prisoners after 4 years of literally the international, the entire world literally laughing at Donald Trump?
Have they been put on trial? Does he want to? He wants to execute them before they've been put on trial. Like, these are the constitutionalists. Pretty sure that the Constitution said something about a speedy and fair trial.
I would recommend. I'd recommend Mohamedou Ould Salahi's Guantanamo Diaries. Either read it or listen to it on Audible. It's a modern classic and just horrifying.
Horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. Let's go to the phones. Calling from 612 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Ribbit. Just kidding.
Oh, all right.
It's not a bullfrog, but it is bull prog.
Oh, bull prog. Welcome. Thanks for calling in. What's happening?
We reached Black History Month, and we're a little over 8 months into our occupation here at George Floyd Square at 38th and Chicago in Minneapolis.
And what's the status?
So I don't know if people are aware, but we have Justice Resolution 001 that we submitted to the city when they asked about lifting up the barricades that they set down for us for safety during the uprising. So we're still in negotiations for a bunch of those, the 24 demands that are listed in there. They kind of range between.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about those demands.
So they range between recalling certain people. Like the number one demand is recalling the county attorney, Mike Freeman. And that's getting, there was a push for getting petitions signed over the summer, but there's a renewed effort that just started back up. And otherwise, the other big thing that we're working on right now is tackling qualified immunity. And otherwise, some of the other demands were like looking into other cases of wrongful conviction. Mayan Burrell is one of those, and he was recently released. There's other opening up cases of deaths at the hands of police, investing money into the area as far as education and jobs programs. So kind of taken a broad swipe at justice for the decades of really terrible practices of the third precinct over the years.
Well, Bullprog, thanks for keeping us updated on that. And what are the next steps? I mean, like when you anticipate where the occupation will be, like what are the next steps?
Well, that's kind of the thing that's kept us going, is that we keep it simple, and we let if I can borrow a term from Jane McAlevy's great book, No Shortcuts, our organic leaders in the community are taking the lead on making steps on those demands, while some of the other people in the community are just doing the day-to-day basic tasks of manning the barricades, greeting residents as they come in, greeting visitors, having conversations with people, and then down to just the other stuff of picking up garbage or shoveling or chipping ice or whatever the residents need to keep their lives livable, so they aren't getting ticked off at us.
I mean, what is the relationship between you guys and the folks in the neighborhood, and what is the broader sense in the city as to what's going on? Like, where is public sentiment?
Kind of hard to gauge. There is. We have a lot of support, and support comes from all over the country. We get visitors from, regularly we see out of state plates from Illinois, Ohio, Texas, Florida, everywhere. And even international visitors from Japan, Germany, Denmark. We just had people from Italy this past weekend. But as far as
everybody wearing masks, I hope.
Yeah. As far as sentiment across the city, it's a bit mixed, and that's part of, there is like a public perception campaign that's being waged, as far as police responding to certain things certain ways. It's tough because there's people that have various different interests in that area, and we're just trying to use this time to fight for a little bit of justice and combat those, for lack of a better term, acts of sabotage.
Right. All right. Well, Bullprog, thanks for the update. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. And no majority reports.
Wait, no majority reports?
Yeah, no sports on the majority report.
There you go. Bullprog has spoken. Appreciate
That's what
the
I'm
call.
saying.
Appreciate the call.
Love you, Emma.
Love you too.
Well, if you launch that sports show, they just don't. They just don't
right. Well,
listen.
we can siphon it off potentially.
Let's play this clip. This is disturbing. And
yeah, right off the bat, we should just say, if you, it's tough to watch.
Yeah, this is police body cam footage. I mean, obviously, like we have seen so much of just reprehensible actions by the police. This is just it's stunning. There is a 9-year-old girl in the backseat of a squad car. Her father has been taken into custody by the Rochester police. And just listen to this body cam footage of the way that they treat this girl. 9-year-old black girl. To give you a little bit more context for this.
Come on. I'm going to punish you and I don't want to. So sit back. Then sit back. Come on. This is your last chance. Otherwise, pepper spray's going in your eyeballs. Come on, let's go.
Sorry, just keep me safe for a minute.
Come on. I want my dad. Come on. I'm going to go get him. Now sit back. Come on. I will fix it. I will fix it.
Dear, what? Just stop for a second and take a deep breath. Hey, just stop.
Please. I will get your dad. No, you said that you were going to pepper spray me. No, please, no, stop. Sit back. Oh, I got a bag.
Just spray her.
No, I have
Just spray her at this point.
Stop. Stop.
Dear.
Stop.
I got her. I got her.
Please, wipe my eye. Wipe my eye, please.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, there is something unbelievable about that. So she's crying, I want my dad. I want my dad. That was a family dispute. How many cops were deployed there?
I mean, it's absolutely stunning. I mean, just absolutely stunning. They pepper spray her with her hands cuffed behind her back, inches away from her. They
should be prosecuted for child abuse.
There is no way that this can be written off as bad training or whatnot. I mean, this is just it's beyond the pale.
Just because they wanted her to be quiet, right? They just wanted her to be quiet because she's undergoing trauma because we don't know fully the details, but that her father was taken into custody. She says, I want my father. But that's kind of inconvenient for them. Like, they just kind of want her to shut up. So what's easier for them is for them to pepper spray her in the face as she's for some reason cuffed behind in a car. Why is this little girl cuffed? Like, this is exactly what you talk about, Sam, when you're framing it from the perspective of like giving cops, a cozy feeling about defund the police, which that's not what you're saying, but like for framing it from their perspective, like unburdening them, right? Like, they should not be employed or deployed in these situations. Like, it is just making it infinitely more traumatic.
And there is they have a person in crisis response team that they started in Rochester, apparently at the beginning of this month, because they have had their history. A guy named Daniel Prude died while being, supposedly restrained by the Rochester police with a hood over his head. And this is just those police officers. They need to lose their badges and they need to be arrested.
In jail. I want them in jail. And, it's a part of this phenomenon too. We saw it with Tamir Rice, obviously, as one of the most infamous cases because he was playing with a toy gun in a park, and within seconds, a cop shoots him point blank, kills him, right? There is psychological data that shows that white people, and even just people in general, age up black kids in their minds. They see them as older than they are than they see white kids of the same age. And that goes to the kind of insane racism in our society and shows that they see them as more threatening. And so that's why they're able to just callously pepper spray a little girl as she cries from the trauma she's experiencing from her father being taken away from her.
One of the cops says, "You're acting like a child." And she responds, "I am a child." She's 9 years old. She's 9 years old. Again, I would not let my kid walk, I don't know, home from school at age 9. The idea that they're going to put this kid in the back of a cruiser, their hands behind her back, and spray her in the face with pepper spray because she's crying because her dad has been taken. Like, this is just, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's totally believable.
Yeah. Even with, like, this is what we saw in the days after, in the days after George Floyd, when there was this national awareness and all of these police officers were being called out from on their conduct. These things still happen because there aren't substantive reforms. There's still qualified immunity. They're still allowed to use the budgets provided to them with basically impunity, and there's no consequences and no structural overhaul. So it's not enough for black squares on Instagram. It's not enough for awareness, which is like my least favorite word in the world. It is about changing things substantively, because there is no reason that cops should be in a situation like that. Absolutely none. Because what do you know? Cops are pretty racist on average, probably more racist than the average population. And they decide to traumatize a girl just a little bit more. They took her father away from her. That wasn't enough. They actually had to physically assault her as well. In jail. I want them in jail.
Absolutely horrific. Let's go to the IMs. Mars in from Chicago. This quick bake was brought to you by SunsetLakeCBD.com. Oh, they sent me some of their CBD fudge, which is
wow,
a disaster for me. First off, all right, well, I'll get into it. It's delicious. And they give you instructions that are like, eat one. It's 25 meg of CBD, wait a half hour or so till it kicks in. But I have a real problem that I think anybody who's worked in the office for more than like 10 minutes knows. I've already told Emma, like, anytime there's cookies in the office, like, you got to take these out.
I had one today, by the way. So one
Good.
Down, like 5 to go. So you don't have to eat.
But the idea of me just eating one piece of fudge. So I had a couple of pieces of fudge yesterday. I was pretty chill for the rest of the day, but we'll talk about that another day. Kev YD, how must an author feel coming on for an interview moments after you guys pump ignoring an author's hard work with Blinkist? I didn't say I would do it with his book. I think some books, I mean, look, authors get payments, I guess, from Blinkist, and the idea is that you want your ideas to travel, and
it's a form of marketing too, ultimately, for their book.
Without a doubt. I mean, this is sort of the same thing that they said about sort of like, if you have online sales of music, it's going to be problematic. And I think when people traded music, there was probably more opportunity for musicians to make money than things like Spotify at this point. But
just different ways for people to consume their stuff. Like, it doesn't need to all be the purest form.
I don't know. I'd be interested in the payment structure, but some of these books, I can assure you, I would not read. Jonathan Armstead, guys, I have a movie recommendation. If you're able, please check out Promising Young Women. Streaming services pay for it. It's a great thriller about a traumatized young woman trying to bring justice to those responsible. I think it's the movie Joker wished it was.
I hear good things, right? So it's like Carey Mulligan, and basically I think she pretends to be really drunk at bars, and then like nice guys take her home and then try to take advantage of her, and I think she murders them. I think that's the premise.
Oh, wait a second.
What?
I think I saw this. I think Mila was watching this.
It just came out.
I think she was watching it like a week or two ago. I think I watched like the tail end of that.
I hear the end is like insane, and I have no idea what happens, but I hear the end is like very polarizing, and I don't know. I want to watch it.
I think I did see that. Lucid limbo, strangle capital punishment in the bathtub is like when Biden said we need to beat and fight domestic violence. Punch and fight. Yes, well, I know. Amelia Clark's eyebrow. At what point is it fair to characterize commentators who continue to minimize Capitol riot as just a small interruption in the process as collaborators? Michael Tracy had spent nearly a month defending the riot on the grounds that it was ineffective. He's an idiot. I mean,
he's not a
idiot.
serious person.
This is the guy who cried that Maxine Waters bumped him.
He seems like, he's not.
That's a Patreon take.
Yeah, that's I need all my validation from people online take.
He's a guy that gets like Trump Jr. likes. I mean,
yeah.
Magnus Cloakland. Every bit of bullshit that you heard about chiropractors is paid for by MDs. Chiropractor can fix your allergies to stop taking drugs. Chiropractor can fix your allergies to stop taking drugs. Also fix your knee problem also. I might be willing to risk my knee. I'm not touching my back though. I don't want that. Elise, you need to stop winning so many debates. It's giving you a big head. Now your big head is starting to cause your neck pain. I don't get people bother being a fisher of men. But if they just wait for the next storm, it'll be raining men. Hallelujah. Shelley, chiropractic comes from osteopathic medicine. Get a massage, Sam. That's the thing. I don't like massages either.
That is a take.
I just don't. I don't know what to say.
But you like acupuncture, correct?
I
like that too.
But I would try acupuncture.
I like acupuncture.
Now that like I've gotten over my fear of needles because I've had to inject my cat with insulin for 6 months or 8 months or whatever it is, I would do acupuncture.
I can say I did it for around a year and a half, and it was very good for my anxiety, and just like also, it did help. I have some issues with my shoulders, so it was helpful there.
I would have gone for my eczema by now, but I'm not doing that during a pandemic. Disco Stew highly supports Sam's anti-chiropractic stance. The ratio of COVID truthism among chiropractors ought to be enough evidence for anyone. I really don't want to get into this war, but I guess I'm just reading IMs. As a Midwesterner, I'm just baffled by how god-awful Andrew Cuomo is. Can you give some explanation how in the hell New York can have such an incompetent boob for a governor? Yes. In fact, I can give you a 2-word answer as to how New York has such an incompetent
Can I guess what it is? Can I guess the 2 words?
Yeah.
Mario Cuomo?
Bingo. Nailed it.
Yes.
Nailed it.
I love when I can, sense what
and
you're going to say.
Mario Cuomo wasn't even that great. It's just that he was eloquent and was coming at a time where the Democratic Party was moving to the right. And the way he spoke was, I think, rhetorically better than most. But he wasn't a terribly great governor. Andrew Cuomo is horrific. And
he's the blue Trump. I said that on Twitter today. I mean, he is absolutely the biggest bully, and he's horrific policy-wise too.
9 of his top health officials have resigned over the past 6 to 8 months because he doesn't listen to them. The guy who came in and saved the subway system, a British expert, was doing a fantastic job. But Cuomo didn't like the fact that he was getting credit for it, and so he fired him. Or pushed him out, more or less. Cuomo's been pushing charter schools. I could go on and on. I sat in a room when the WFP was talking about running against him the first time, the year that Zephyr Teachout did. A room full of community organizers who worked on issues of poverty and of homelessness and of all sorts of types of reform and whatnot. And they, you would imagine would be the first, not necessarily the first, but the people very sensitive to the idea of like the material difference between having a Republican governor and a Democratic governor. And to a person, they all said, you know what? if we had a Republican governor, it wouldn't be as bad as what Cuomo's doing now. And Cuomo is just horrible. And to the extent that there's been any mitigation of that, it was a function of Cynthia Nixon running, and not just Cynthia Nixon, but she was the sort of the public face of a tremendous amount of organizing that went behind also exposing the IDC and forcing Cuomo to leverage Cuomo's desire to maybe have a national political future.
And you can't underestimate the Ocasio-Cortez's run sparking like just greater awareness of, wow, we can have real leftists represent us in New York on the state level too. I mean, then that allowed for Nixon's run to have more life, which then created the opening with the IDC.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Kid tested Politburo. Sam saw a Gorka infomercial about his new fish oil and chiropractic and said never. Knee problem, Sam? Could I interest you in some fish oil? Johnny Appleseed. What exactly does McConnell want? I get his political goals, but what does he get out of anything? Does he just want to be in the driver's seat? Does all this money go towards fulfilling something that brings him any sort of joy? Is he just a sadist? You know, I think it's a fool's errand to try and be a normal person and understand what animates 90% of politicians. I just think it's a fool's errand. And I think you can get some rough proximity with a couple of them, but I've been doing this for 16 years, and for the life of me, I can't explain how you could sit there and let your petty differences with another person make you, or your sort of like your desires for power make you, while you're aware of this, make millions of people suffer. I just don't understand it. You know, like Joe Lieberman, these type of guys. Like, I mean, I just don't understand what goes into it. They just have a fundamentally different worldview or perspective on themselves than I think we can understand. And I don't think it's I just don't think it's it's really worth speculating too much, because I just don't think we can really understand it.
It's kind of, it might be, you know, again, we've talked about this, I guess, a little off air, just a little pathological, a little personality disordery, need for attention, need for combat, you know.
Well, they've done studies on like CEOs, you know, and, you know, if CEOs are like that, there's no reason to believe that at least a certain class of politicians, I mean, we're only talking about, you know, 500-600 people, right? And who have these level of attain this level of level in politics, but particularly when you're talking about senators. I mean,
the ability to put your name out there, the self-importance of it too, or like the ability to kind of be the center of attention. What does that take?
I mean,
you know?
I mean, obviously we have a little bit of that as well. I mean, sitting here, so there's some psychological damage, but even as psychologically damaged that brought me to this point in my life, I still can't comprehend that. Gay Frog Caller, curious about the military coup going on in Myanmar. I'm not going to pretend to really be an expert or knowledgeable at all about this, but my understanding is that the military, that the folks in Myanmar have become more and more enamored with democracy. And conversely, the military has become more and more frustrated with civilian rule. And
Aung San Suu Kyi is, you know, obviously been perpetuating or perpetrating an insane amount of persecution of Rohingya Muslims. So that also plays into that. And she's been doing this as a Nobel Peace Prize winner, right? She won like 15 years ago, something like that. She's been doing this and slowly cracking down in this way for a decade or so.
But the NLD, the National League for Democracy, won their election, I think like by 80% or something, like a huge win in I think it was in December. I will start to read in more on this, but I just not something I'm on top of. Jimmy Dore Plopper Watcher. Emma, I'm sorry you guys fell for Sam's excuse to leave early on Friday. Guess you weren't around the time he pulled a trick like that. But a while back, Sam told the crew that he thought he had to fart and then left abruptly, which brings me to my question about Hello Tushy. Okay, I'm ready to go into this.
Fucking awful.
Oh, yeah. Cheyenne from Florida. I'm also only 25.
I'm not 25.
Patrick from Kansas. Can I get a shofar for my second shot of the Pfizer vaccine this morning? Also, what is Emma's prediction for the Super Bowl?
Okay, that's a fair, quick. I think the Chiefs are going to win.
Chiefs are going to win? You're going to vote against Brady?
I mean, it's not a vote. Yeah, I am. I think the AFC is just so much more talented than the NFC. And you just I'm not going to bet against Mahomes. Are you kidding me?
All right. Well, then maybe that we'll have a bet.
Also, the Chiefs defense is underrated, by the way. So yeah, maybe we will.
Maybe we will. Angel, every morning I have an AM Quickie with either Sam or Lucy, and it's the best part of waking up. Sam Seder, bra salesman. I have several family members who are chiropractors, and they are quacks. They are anti-vaxxers and convinced my parents growing up that if you had a fever, you should get adjusted because your spine alignment is the most important thing, but not like actual germs or viruses. If you overuse them, you become dependent on them. My dad has to go twice a week or he feels terrible. They also call themselves doctors. They are not. I don't want to get into this. From the hand, chiropractic is 50% physical therapy, 25% placebo with joint cracking, and 25% utter BS. See a real physical therapist. That I do. I went to a physical therapist for my knee. Big dose of CBD plus yoga is an awesome combo. But of course, you need to avoid pushing your joints too far. That's where the physical therapist can show you the right movements to get your mobility back. Indeed. Winnipeg Craig, chiropractic key is completely bogus. The tradition is built on centuries of guesswork and religious teachings. There's the odd one who can help if you badly injured your back, but none of them are doing anything trained physiotherapist couldn't do. Adrian, Sam, what do you think about Jimmy Dore comparing himself to the Black Panthers in Chicago who joined white racists in class solidarity? Also, Emma, hard disagree on Rodgers versus Brady. He's talking about Hampton and was the Young Patriot League, and first of all, it's not like Jimmy Dore has a group or he is just a media personality like we are. We don't have a group. We haven't organized anything. We don't have a movement. It's not a movement. Having people listen to your YouTube show is not a movement. And so when Jimmy Dore pairs up with a group, what he's doing is just promoting the group because all we are publicists. We are just megaphones. So there's nothing tactical that's going on there. And let me just get that straight. So it's characterized in the right way. If the Sunset Movement got involved with I don't know what the analogy would be.
Because already it's offensive to compare the Boogaloos to the Young Patriots, who the only thing people cite as them being white supremacists is the use of the Confederate battle flag, which was wrong, but they weren't doing it out of white supremacy. They're doing it out of cultural reasons that we now have discarded.
And they also ended up basically throwing that off.
Right.
And so and what you're talking about is them joining up involved more than, hey, they said one speech. Who are the Boogaloo Boys? Let's have them on the next day. Turns out he's okay with gay people.
They amplified each other's hashtags then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the analogy, in addition to it being incorrect history, the analogy is also wrong because Jimmy's none of those things. And the Boogaloo Boys, what was going on is just whitewashing, literally whitewashing and doing so out of complete ignorance. There is a conflation between leftism, which involves an ideological perspective on how you deal with the current power structure in our system. And I'm certainly not as to the left as a lot of people. I'm not as to the left as Jamie. I'm not as to the left as, full on folks who believe that we need to have a completely socialist society, and obviously communist. But, and to the extent that I have, I guess, disagreements of opinion as to where we should go or differences in ideology, they have an ideological response to a system that I also find problematic. And they have a cohesive, coherent, thoughtful response that can really, when applied, can only pull things in a specific direction. When your response is, I don't like the boss, but I don't have a critique of the system of the boss, then what happens is you just replace the old boss with a new boss. And if there's no any type of like ideological grounding to it, if it is just like, hey, they're for overthrowing the government and I'm against the government too, well, then your whole agenda to get Medicare for all, or to get a reduced work week, or to get decommodification or nationalization of certain things, that goes out the window, because those guys over there that you are joining with to overthrow the government, guess what? They don't want those things, and they got more guns than you. Like, going down that road is thoughtless and stupid, or insidious and nefarious. And I don't need to make a distinction. I don't need to know. I don't need to come up with the idea that, where does Jimmy's funding come from, or this and that. I don't need any of that shit. It's stupid and wrong, regardless of what the intent behind it is. And it needs to be rejected. Some people are savvier about what they're doing than others. And I don't need to spend time to figure out who's who in that scenario, because the bottom line is quite obvious that I don't care if he's for, of course they're for, things that are fighting the government power, because they want to get rid of the government. They want to go to a feudal system. And why wouldn't the guys with the AR-15s want to go to a feudal system? Because they think that they're going to win in that system. That's my short answer to that question.
It was a pretty offensive debasement of history by everybody who was peddling that garbage in defense of Jimmy Dore, having a Boogaloo Boy on. I like when people bring up history. To see it deployed like that is disgusting.
It's disgusting. Drew Breeze, the GOAT. I listened to Crystal and Kyle's podcast with Justin Jackson about Force the Votes. Get how many times they brought up other concessions like PAYGO exemption 0. I know Justin Jackson is essentially just a regular guy with a day job, but they promoted him as a face of this movement, and he didn't know anything about it. Leads me to believe Brianna Joy Gray is totally full of shit. Well,
you might have stumbled upon it.
All right. We're going to take 2 more calls, and then we're getting out of here after a couple IMs. Calling from a 208 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Ruben. I'm calling from Boise, Idaho.
Ruben from Boise. What's on your mind? Ruben, how did you manage to... Okay, good. Right there. Stay on by your phone. Go ahead.
Okay. Basically, I go to Boise State here, so I'm pretty young. There's just a lot of different factions. Kind of, it's crazy that you answered my call just as you were talking about, Boogaloo Boys and shit. And I'm thinking about how we have all these different factions as far as neo-Nazis and people that we have to learn to fight against. I mean, obviously Boise. It's pretty centralized. It's just straight libs or blue line flyers. You know what I'm saying? So yep. I've noticed a new type of person pop up recently within direct action pursuit. And it's kind of like a type of person that like wants to align themselves with like liberation movement. So it makes me think that there's like reasoning to be had because they're not like out over like white supremacists, but at the same time, these people that I've noticed have started like attacking like not physically, but like inadvertently over social media and stuff, attacking like Black femmes, like actually activating, like doing work in community as far as like mutual aid and shit, and they're like coming at them, being like, where is this money going? Where are these funds going? Like shit like that. And so I'm like thinking about their like posts and stuff, like looking at comments and like commenting myself and seeing like their backlash, seeing like this criticism, but not seeing like these types of people's like response to these criticisms. And like they're in my DMs like saying Black trans lives matter, and I'm like, okay, this is rooted in white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if these people like just need to get their shit rocked, or if there's reasoning to be had. Like I can see that that some people, I mean, there's different levels to everything, but some people will maybe there's a hope in realigning and education. But if there's no reasoning, or if there's no like willfulness on their end, what's the move? Like, all right, well, here's
okay, this is listen. This is my opinion on that. It is a good thing for you to interact with these people. The way that you can get a sense of, exactly where they're coming from is what happens if we overthrow the government is one of those questions, or what happens if we overcome these people. If you have skepticism, it is perfectly fine for you to engage these people and try and, over time, convert them, maybe, use their anti-author, dig deeper into what is behind their anti-establishment, anti-authority stances, and promote a better worldview. But the thing that you got to be careful about is, you need to do this to them as an individual, not as a member of their group. Because if you start to validate their group, you're starting to validate the ideology, and things start flowing the other way. And that
totally. And I think these people can be pinpointed. I was trying to like paint it on a broader scale in the sense of anonymity, but I think proximity definitely matters. Like how close I am actually interacting, and like if I'm seeing these people pop up, if I'm seeing them actually do things, like if I'm seeing them donate, that's all things to take into account.
Yeah, but really ideologically, you got to be comfortable as to where they're going with this project, because I can throw $50 at something in the short term if that's going to get me to get you to join my group, and these guys are they're not idiots. That guy who went on Jimmy Dore's thing has been, he and his crew have been engaging in this is an outreach. And here's the bottom line. If you're a Boogaloo boy and you agree with all these progressive things, why are you still a Boogaloo boy? How do you not be aware of what the Boogaloo boys are set up to do? Even if it's a question of like, well, we got some bad Boogaloo boys and I'm not like one of them. Well, we know what makes you a Boogaloo boy versus not. And that is a desire to overthrow the government. And then the question is like, what do you intend to do when you overthrow the government? Is it to use the government to get healthcare for everybody, to decommodify certain things, to, no, the answer is no. And that's the important thing. So, and if
like
the answer is
said,
yes,
it's all whitewashing.
If the answer is yes, Ruben, if the answer is yes at that point, then it's like, well, then why are you still a Boogaloo boy?
Change up.
Exactly.
And I think it's all what it comes down to is, like you said, it's all whitewashing. I mean, if you're saying Black Lives Matter, if you're literally making a BLM Boise like page as a whole white man, that's not what's gonna happen. You can't co-opt that
all right,
for
Ruben,
yourself.
I gotta let you go, but
I appreciate
thanks
all
for
of
the call,
you.
man.
I listen to you a lot of love.
All right.
Thanks,
over
man.
Here on the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, Emma and Matt and Sam. I'm so stoked y'all answer my call. Got to talk to y'all.
Thanks for the call,
Yeah,
Ruben.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, take care. Stay up.
All right. The final call of the day. Oh. Calling from a 704 area code. $704.
Oh, hey, this is Jackson from North Carolina.
Jackson from North Carolina. What's on your mind?
Just got another edition of the Majority Report Fight Club bracket. So I believe last we left off, Melania Trump had just swept the field of the Trump family, coming out on top. And Hillary Clinton, I'm not sure who she went against, but
Nancy
I
Pelosi?
do believe it was unanimous consent that she won. Am I breaking up?
No,
I think I think it was Nancy Pelosi.
Oh,
that wrong?
yeah. So here we go. Fight of the former first ladies. Who would win, Melania versus Hillary?
It's actually really hard. Because Melania's probably stronger, but Hillary's definitely scrappier and more persistent.
I would say, if we could equalize their age a little bit, I would say Clinton, no doubt whatsoever.
But
I don't know. Melania's got 6 inches on.
That's what I'm about to say. Melania's like a lot taller and bigger than her.
I feel like Hillary would go right for the.
It'd be like Rocky.
Fight dirty though.
It'd be like Ivan Drago versus Sly.
Yeah, I'm gonna take my guts as Melania in this point, but I guess I don't know what Brendan, Matt, Sam's going with Hillary.
Yep.
And what about you guys?
I'm taking Melania because she has all the high-tech training equipment.
Yeah, I bet she's in great shape.
Appreciate the call. That was the final call of the day, ladies and gentlemen. We'll take a couple IMs and then we're out of here. A Square. So very sorry for your loss, Bayef. Yeah, that's horrible.
That's horrible.
Melancholy. Sam doesn't force Emma to wear Third Love. What a relief. Now, she was not one of our official bra triers.
I was not, but yeah, I came to it on my own. The product was so good, I came to it on my own.
Wildcard 26 to the homie, that's Bayef, who lost his wife. There are no words for that kind of pain. I feel for you. All my hopes, sir. Emma needs to start a misinformation campaign now about how Tom Brady is not the legitimate winner of the NFC Championship and challenge the results. Muay Thai kickboxing is another level of pain and commitment. I did ballet for 11 years, Taekwondo for 4, boxing for 1, fencing for 5. Muay Thai was the most demanding of them all. It was sick. It was crazy. Wow. Can we discuss Cuomo? And please and thank you. Yeah, we did a little bit. We'll get more into it tomorrow. One more time. Nick from PA. Hey, Sam and crew. I heard the Arkansas governor Republican bring up the Defense Production Act on a Sunday news show. Do you think Biden will do anything or it'll be brought back into discourse? My understanding is they were going ahead with it, at least in part. I haven't seen anything follow up on that. We got to look into that. All right, 4 more of these. Tim Caucus. Can I get a shout out for the Marathon refinery workers with Teamsters 120 who have been on strike for over a week in Minnesota? Management bargained in bad faith, tried to use low bid subcontractors for safety sensitive jobs and add to the workload of already overloaded positions, especially after Wisconsin Husky refinery explosion in 2018. Their members won't stand for anything that could threaten the safety of workers, community, or environment. Let's, there's a shout out. Maybe we can see if we get one of them on the line. Call in for 5 minutes. Stephanie Iris. Yoga tune-up therapy balls are great alt to massage. No one has to touch you. You have a total control on the pressure of the massage. We'll send you an email to send you a pair. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, Sam, do you have you should get a Theragun. It's expensive, but would be very helpful for your back.
My back is fine. It was a nerve like up in like the back of my head. It was nuts.
Basically, it's just like a self massager, and like athletes have a lot of them.
Well, it's not like I don't like to be touched.
$250. Well, no. You said that's what you just said. You said you don't like to be touched.
No, I don't like to be massaged.
Oh, I'm
like,
okay.
It's not like it's because I'm afraid somebody's got germs. I just don't like the idea of stuff going into my sinew. And like, what? I don't like to be conscious of the fact that I am like just basically slapping me.
Yeah, you are moving the goalpost. And what's a sinew?
Like, like your muscles and your
muscle fiber.
I don't
underneath. Sam doesn't like to confront what's underneath the skin.
Exactly. Exactly.
That might have led to these problems, but sure.
Yeah, I said this is the best therapy session Sam's had in ages.
This is well established in my therapy. Neutrality is best. Having your back cracked is fun, but a lot of chiropractic science is bunk, and the roots of it are deep pseudoscience. Would recommend Behind the Bastards episode on the founder to understand it's not really a science, but it has the trappings of it to fool people into believing. Not trying to rain on anybody's parade if they've had a nice time at a chiropractor, but I agree with Matt. It's mostly placebo effect. And the final, I don't want to get involved in this. I'm not taking a position on this whatsoever. I just don't want to go. And the final I am of the day. Hi, everyone. Happy update. I got my first dose of the Moderna vaccine last week, and I accepted a leave replacement position teaching 4th grade. That's great, says teacher Lauren. Terrific. Folks, regardless of what, and we'll talk about this tomorrow, regardless of what opportunity you have to get the vaccine, whether it's Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, get it. The out of the 75,000 people who are under trials for all those vaccines, including the Johnson & Johnson, I think nobody died. And normally we would expect 150 people to die. Hospitalizations were really low relative to hundreds of hospitalizations that would expect for 75,000. So if you have a chance to get stabbed in the arm with one of those needles, do it. In the meantime, Emma, Matt, Brendan, great job today. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.